morning, everybody, and thank you for coming this morning. And for those of you, we are live streaming, so I believe our audio and video is working really well this morning. So we will also post this afterwards online, so it's available for everybody. Just a couple of introductory comments, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris Lindsay. Today we're going to focus getting you through background information, and we have some options to present to you in terms of next steps for the budget. We will focus on three key areas as we work through the budget choices with you. The first is to review staffing levels at the city historically and also where we are today, because we believe that's very important coming out of COVID, and how are we doing, where are we at, how do we compare historically on staffing levels, and that's a key building block to our operating budget. The second thing you'll see is a strong tie-in to our community survey results and how our budget work compares to what our community told us in terms of how we're doing and what our next steps might be in terms of their needs. And then finally, we do have some very strong linkages also to our strategic plan. And so when you see a lot of the budget work come forward, the later part of this morning, you'll see the strong connections to the strategic plan that you set. So having said that as an introductory remark, I'll turn it over to Chris Lindsay, and we'll get going on our presentation for you this morning.
Thank you, Jody. Chris Lindsay, Assistant City Manager. We wanted to start off this morning with a quick check-in on the agenda and talk about any aspirations, goals that you all have today, and make sure we're going to meet expectations with the agenda.
I went through all your slides. Everything's easy to read. I think I know where we're headed today, and let's get going.
Awesome.
If we get done early, you know what? It will be a gift to all of us.
Awesome.
And you.
All right.
But we need to get the work done, so we're here for the whatever needs to be done.
Well, then I'm going to roll right through.
Okay.
So Jody hit on the scope. I wanted to, on this slide, just add one more item. We're really going to be talking about the general fund today. We're going to do some more work with you on the utilities side of the budget. So we're not quite prepared for that today. So it's going to be primarily focused on the general fund, sales and use tax type items today. Wanted to quickly hit on our schedule coming up. We're going to rapidly work after today to get the proposed budget out on August 31st. And I think these are the same dates you've seen for a while now, a hearing on the 12th. Council review on Monday night, September 19th, and then two readings in October. I also wanted to just hit quickly, I know they're in your binders and you've all seen them, but prior to today, we've done a programmatic overview of the budget. We did that back in May. We did a CIP overview in June. We had the community survey presentation on July 18th. You all took a carryover appropriation and approved it on July 25th. And then just this past Monday, we did the two presentation revenue overview with the folks from the University of Colorado Leeds School.
They were good. I liked them.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So just quickly, a lot of policy and community feedback we've received to date that we're using as we prepare the proposed budget. The first and foremost is the strategic plan. We've got a couple postings of the vision and the mission. We left out the strategic plan as a reminder for everyone, and the detailed version is in your binder as well. And then these 5 priorities we hope are baked in, and we hope you'll see that. And what we're doing today: preparedness and resilience, proactive public safety, shared sense of community, quality of life, and robust infrastructure. In addition to that policy level feedback, we've got the community survey feedback, the city services that are the most important to provide. We pulled out that slide from the community survey.
Did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, happy to. I was letting folks read, but So of the folks ranked 1 through 3 on the city survey, city services that are most important to provide on the community survey, the ones that came out on top were quality of police, fire, and ambulance services, quality of water and sewer services, maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, and then we had a little gap before we got down to parks and recreation programs and facilities, preparedness for emergencies and disasters, codes and ordinances, quality of services, and the flow of traffic. If I could also jump to the next slide, so slide number 7. The importance, satisfaction rating that our community survey consultant put together this time around took both that importance ranking and the satisfaction ranking and combined those into a bit of a matrix scoring. So we'd know those services that were important that didn't quite meet the mark for our residents. And it's a similar list that you'll see here, but I think the item to note for us is that city streets and sidewalks bumps up to the top when we look at both the importance and the satisfaction.
Can I, quick question on on any of these, but the one I have specifically in mind is the city codes, enforcement of city codes. And I think I asked about this when they were in, and I'm trying to remember, do we know, like if you take any of these, if it was pretty widely spread, number 6 across, or are there certain parts of the city where like that particular one raised higher to the top? Does that make sense what I'm asking? And you may not have that now, but I'm just curious because...
Yeah, so we do have a heat map, and I don't have it on me, but we can provide that.
Okay, and it might have been, they might have had that in the presentation.
It was definitely, there was a attachment that had all the GIS coded maps, so I know we have that.
And, okay, and I can look back at that too, but the reason that I think it's important in these discussions and why I'm asking specifically, and I think I brought this up during the presentation, I just want to make sure that if like specifically on code enforcement, whether it's like parking or graffiti or lawns or weeds or whatever it is, but if there's a particular area where it's more of a hot spot, that we're allocating resources to it. But thank you.
All right. Thanks to the staff here. So in the PowerPoint for the community survey, which I believe generally everyone had in their binder, Councilor Nirmala, I'll check with you here in a second. In the Mayor Pro Tem for you, it's going to be in section 4, slide number 19.
What date was that?
That presentation was on July 18th.
Okay, and so this is very helpful, and I appreciate that, because this is exactly what I was curious about. That the historic part of the city was more dissatisfied. I mean, so you can see that there's a pocket where we have room for improvement. So I just want to know how that plays into budget allocation as we go forward and what we're going to try to do in terms of people, power, and services in order to address that. Because I mean, obviously you would prefer everybody be satisfied. I mean, neutral doesn't really bother me, but it would be good that if we could, next time we do this survey, that at least it's consistent throughout the city in the same color, as far as where people are satisfied or not.
Did you see Midlands' graffiti? It turned it on. And then from 74th to 72nd, every utility box is several graffitis.
Did you know?
And I was driving, so I can't.
You're not the only one.
Ooh, can I return mine for tab?
Yes, you'll get a nickel on the
Color-coded,
way out.
please.
All right, thank you for that brief intermission there. Was there any other feedback on the community survey items?
Just a question, kind of along the same lines, because, you know, I notice there are areas where the sidewalks are especially bad, and so that's, you know, whether it's, I know we have issues with streets and sidewalks, but I think, I don't know if there's a focus as to which we would address first, or better understand the community's concerns, 'cause I think both are bad, but sidewalks also impact the aesthetics of your neighborhood too. So anyway, that's.
Thank you for that. All right. We did just want to highlight for everyone here and our public that might be watching, community budget requests. We've talked about this before, but community budget requests can be made through really any form in which folks can get in touch with the city. So through Access Westminster, to city council members, to departments, public comment we track, public hearing, emails to staff. Every community budget request that we receive, those are researched by staff. We provide a recommendation and a write-up that'll be included with the proposed document that'll be up for discussion in September. So we are tracking those. We've had a number of those already, and we saw some more this week. So as we've worked to prepare the proposed 2023 budget, and we're still working on this, staff has really coalesced around 3 themes. First would be that staffing is aligned with strategic plan priorities. We want to make sure that the staffing that we highlight and the staff that we have certainly fit within the strategic plan that you all have written. The second is a focus on priority core services. I think the discussion already of code enforcement and enforcement of ordinances hits that, but there's a number of those, and I think we're going to see that highlighted through our presentation today. And then last would be infrastructure, sidewalks, streets, facilities, and you'll see that highlighted certainly in the capital section today and a little bit of the operating section. That's what staff has been building this budget on. Jody, I don't know if you want to make any comments on these 3 themes, or open this up for discussion with council.
I think the intention here is to pause and check in that this makes sense and this aligns with where you think you would like us to go. And then if that checkpoint is solid, we'll keep moving forward.
Councillor Baker, anything?
Well, I view the devil is in the details. And these are general, vague sort of themes or aims, and we could drive trucks through it. The devil is in the details. The deciding point is in the details. As an example, do you have money set aside for community requests that you will be fulfilling some of them? Or is it going to be another exercise like the community development block grant funds were, where the people could say anything they wanted, but it wasn't going to change?
So we don't have a specific pot of funds set aside right now. We're taking those one at a time as they come through, and we research those that we recommend to council to include. Those we will have funds identified for.
Okay. And could you, the synopsize the guidance council has given you, or have you done that when you said we're executing, the strategic plan? Has council given you any additional guidance with this budget besides our strategic plan?
So I think certainly we've heard feedback from council in each of those presentations that's been provided that we've used to narrow into these 3 themes in addition to the strategic plan.
Thanks.
Councillor Nermella?
Not at the moment.
Councillor Emmons?
I'm good.
Councillor or Mayor Pro Tem?
I had a couple quick comments. I'm actually looking back at the 2022 budget, and I can't see it in there, but what I'm curious about, because Counselor Baker brings up a good point about citizen requests, because there are particular ones that we see every year, I feel like. Example would be the finishing the work on Federal Boulevard around 120th. That's one that I think comes up every single budget cycle and in between. So I'm just curious, like, how do we look at those things and try to put them, if it's something you couldn't do next year, how do you, thank you, how do you make sure that we track so that we're actually not just listening to the same one, especially if it's something that the city thinks that there's validity to us accomplishing, so that, you know, and I've been here 5 years now. No, she got me what I need, thank you. But point being is, how do we move that along so that it's not, you know, if I'm here for another 4 years, that we're not talking about the same thing. And I understand we have to prioritize those, but if, you know, there are certain ones that, sometimes there's ones that come up that don't seem like they have any support in council or staff, but I want to understand, like, how can we track and say, okay, yeah, this one came up over the last handful of years, so that we can go back at some of those ones that council has shown before and see if maybe that's something we could go back to or plan forward for, so that it's just not, no, we don't have money for that this year, and we're moving the needle along on it. The other thing I wanted to at least bring up as a talking point, or something that maybe we could look into, I had brought this up to acting or interim manager Andrews about neighborhoods that once upon a time had HOAs, specifically mine. I've seen this issue raise up. If I was sharing with Jody that once upon a time Countryside had a HOA that lasted, I think, for about the first year of its existence, and it went away. There is 2 common spaces where there was signs in each of those spaces that said Countryside. One of those was demolished. It was in a median, and I think it was like drunk driver hit it and destroyed it. I don't think we were allowed to put it back because a new code doesn't allow you to have those signs in the medians. But overall, arching point is nobody takes care of that now. There was a group called Neighbors for Countryside that Tom Romansberger started, who's the gentleman we named the ball field for. And that I ran that group for a while before I was on council, and it kind of just fell apart. Partly because when they spun it up, it was in response to kind of the downturn in the economy in 2008, and there were a lot of the homes in the neighborhood that weren't being taken care of. So that group of people were like mowing lawns of houses that were vacant and stuff to try to keep the neighborhood nice and preserve their home values. One of the other things they were doing were taking care of those signs. But now that group's fallen apart, I see a lot of people like on Nextdoor, for example, saying, who takes care of this? And I think they're looking for that group that doesn't really exist anymore because it has a website on it. But point being, for the city to, you know, continue to have every part of it look nice, is that something that with those common spaces, because I think most of the rest of the common space in Countryside belongs to the city. So how do we address those kind of weird little like nuances and pockets with signs and stuff? Because, you know, you're going to have that sign is going to continue to dilapidate. There's not really anybody looking after it, and I don't think it lends well for the city in a whole. That's the one example I know of, just because it's in my neighborhood. But are there other areas like that where we want to make sure that those signs that maybe once were taken care of by an HOA are, you know, nobody's really tending to them? So I want to at least figure out, like, and maybe we don't do it this year, but maybe that's something we start forward looking to, how we take care of that and pay to manage those signs that nobody else is doing.
So I've got that one down in particular. So I'll make sure we follow up on that. On the community requests, on the Federal Boulevard project, I think you'll see that discussed later on in our slides. We're also still moving forward with an earmark request at the federal level, so we're hopeful that we'll get funds there. And I hear your feedback on kind of the history of the items that have come forward, so we'll look at some manner to bring that back to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because especially with so many new members of council, you know, just because we didn't do it last year maybe doesn't mean it's not a good thing. So it would be nice to I mean, maybe not for all of eternity, but maybe the last couple of budget cycles to be able to look back. I mean, because it's not a ton. I mean, we typically get, what, like 5 or 6 citizen requests? So it would be worthwhile, I think, if everybody agrees to at least review them as part of our process.
Okay.
I'm good. I have some questions as we get deeper, but after I read last night, and I know that the one that, the missing link between 120th and where it goes into federal to Zuni, I read that that was in there, so I'm good.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to begin by jumping into the staffing section, and wanted to provide a little bit of some historical scenarios here. Actually, John, can you talk about this one?
John Praisner, Policy and Budget Manager. So what you see on slide 10 is our historical staffing levels with a couple of scenarios. So the blue line there is our actual authorized FTE levels. Beginning in 2008, coming out of the Great Recession, you see a dip and a slow recovery through 2022. There are a couple of other scenarios included there. The first one that I'll highlight is that gray line had it not been for the recession and the reduction of staff beginning in 2010, and if we remain at a flat level. So it took us until 2017 to get back to that same level. The next line, the orange line, is continuing in 2010 with a 1% growth annually of staffing. From 2010, had it not been for the Great Recession, in 2022 we are still slightly below that level. So this is just meant to be a historical depiction of where we are, where we kind of came from, and where we could have been.
Is the 1% supposed to be more like a trend line or something
Yeah.
versus?
Not
Yeah.
not that we were at 1%, or it obviously varies slightly, just a trend line to kind of show.
Okay.
Counselor Baker?
Do you have the actual staffing we have?
An actual would be, when we thought about this, is slightly difficult to depict, because an actual in January, an actual in March, an actual in December they're all different. So this is the staffing that
Well, you can do them by each of the months, it's fine.
that what?
You could do it by each of the months, you don't have to average for the year.
I don't know if we will be able to come up with something that would be apples to apples.
I would have thought something like that. Don't we know how many paychecks we write as a city? Okay, thank you.
My question is, because of that dip from 2010, the true history is the city went through, because of recession and whatnot, and took 18 months to investigate, to talk to employees, to find where there were overlaps, to find, as they interviewed with job descriptions, what people were actually doing versus what they were supposedly being paid to do. And they looked for overlaps. They looked for things that we shouldn't be doing. One of the things was the water folks that take the bills. People wanted to, like you do at King Soopers, can I write the check for $20 more? And we became a banking system. And there was a person that was having to go to the bank more often to do all that, so they quit doing that. But it was through a long process of figuring all of that out and figuring where there was duplicates, how we could downsize a bit. And so what I don't know is, as you grew again, because every year then we did look at every department. Did we cut too thin? We heard from a couple of them, within a couple of years, we need this, and so we would put back, but I also know from then the later councils, they just, one person in particular came to me one day and said, oh, we finally hired all the 72 that you let go. And I just thought, you have no clue what we went through and why we did what we did. So that's what this history doesn't talk about. We did it for a reason. And we did it because we had duplication. We had it because we were doing things as a city we shouldn't have been doing. And so that is truth from that history staffing piece that would never be shown here.
To that point, I think one of the things that, and this isn't just the city, I think it's everybody in general after COVID, we have changed so much how we do work. And I think that in every organization, or those that are really taking this opportunity as an opportunity, reevaluating, especially because it's hard to get staff and things have changed. So, much like they did back during the recession for different reasons, I think it's a good point in time to check in and start looking like, how are we doing work? How is our workforce most effective between, if we're going to continue to allow people to, work remote part of the time and be in the office part of the time, are we making sure that they're effective that way and what their job roles entail? I know, for example, like in my organization where I run the department, we offset like who gets to work remote and who gets to be in the office, so then we always have coverage, and I'm sure the city does a similar thing. But point being, I think that we need to rethink how the workforce works in the different jobs. You can't do that for every job. Like police officers obviously aren't really going to work remote, or firefighters, but for those that do, how are we best allocating those resources for the work that needs to be done to serve the public? So I think it would, it'd be wise at this point for us to be able to look at the gaps we have, excuse me, and figure out how to best utilize the resources that, that we have before we determine future employment level, if that makes sense. Just because I don't know, what your learnings have kind of been trying to navigate through this. And I think actually, Jody and I were talking about this recently, as far as like, we're not really totally through it because we're just kind of on the other end of it. Now it's like, okay, now how do we level things out with kind of this new way of doing things? And I think that the part of the challenge for any organization is, if you say, no, we're not going to do any remote, then I think you have a problem with whether or not people stay, because so many places are allowing you to work at least part-time remote, and then it makes you less competitive if you're not allowing some level of it. I've seen that, at least in my organization. I don't know if that's the same, so I would look to you guys for feedback in this sector if you're seeing the same thing, and if people are if that's an expectation of the workforce now. Because I know certainly in the private sector, it's an expectation that people get to work remote.
Oh, sorry.
Councilor Baker?
Yeah, why did we make the assumption of 1% growth?
Why don't I go ahead and address that? We're not making an assumption. In fact, what we did was just calculate the line so that we could reflect that it equated to a 1% growth over that period of time. So the idea was just to demonstrate that what the blue line represents between 2010 and 2022 is 1% growth. That's all. We wanted to just show what that would have otherwise been. So it's not a suggestion, recommendation, finding, or best practice. It's merely to demonstrate from 2010 to 2022, but for those changes, it would have equaled a 1% growth.
See, because for me, I would have chosen a 1% decrease every year to reflect the productivity gains of our workforce. Aren't we supposed to be doing things faster, better, quicker, cheaper? Isn't that a goal of both stewardship and thrift?
Yeah, I would just say.
And as an example, I'll point out to the $500,000 sales tax program they bought. That's supposed to save, what, 7 jobs or something?
In time, those efficiencies we think will prove themselves with online filing and so forth, but I'll just use calls for service as an example that I think probably the public and the council are aware. Our firefighters and police officers are responding to many more calls for service over this 15-year trend line. And in an upcoming slide, you'll see some of the staffing additions that have occurred from the low point of 2011 to now occurring relative to those calls for service. So even though our police officers and firefighters are more efficient than ever with their tools, their call loads in particular are higher. And that also, I think, is spread across a lot of other departments of the city. But I think those will reveal themselves as we get into the upcoming slides.
Just to respond to, I think, a couple of things. One, I'm looking at the blue line of authorized FTE, and we are not fully staffed to that level, correct?
No, we are not fully staffed to that level. And, you know, an organization the size of the City of Westminster will inevitably have vacancies at all times, different amounts at different times. And we've had an unprecedented decrease. But prior to that, I think our vacancy levels have been fairly consistent, you know, between 3 and, you know, maybe 5% type of a thing. Obviously, we're much higher now and reporting that to council each month. So it was suggested maybe to go back and do additional data work, but I think it would probably reveal a comparable trend except for, you know, 2021 and 2022 in terms of the actual.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dorr. If I could add to that, tie it back into also Councillor Baker's question. Since November, I've been reporting monthly to City Council with our monthly actuals in terms of our workforce size. When we started to emerge from COVID, we were about 15% vacancy across our workforce, and we're now at 12.4% vacancy. So you can find those monthly data right down to the positions that are vacant and which ones are actively recruiting and which ones are being filled on a monthly basis. So that information is available for the past 10 months. And then again, I would speak to what Mr. Dorr said regarding this trend line, and later slides we show where some of the staffing changes have occurred in the city since, you know, in the past, say 10 years or in that bracket of time. And you can see where, to speak to Mr. Dorr's and Councillor Baker's comments, some of the things are really out of our control, like call loads on our police officers and our fire and paramedic services. So you do see growth in those positions, and that's kind of the building block for moving forward. We just wanted to show you the data where the staffing have been and where they've increased over the past years to help inform. I would comment as we move towards the options near the end of the time together today, and again, speaking directly to this issue, with 12.4% vacancy across our authorized strength, we're really advancing options that are very close to a flatline option, a flatline approach this year for our staffing levels. We really believe and tying back to what Mayor Pro Tem said, this is the opportunity for us to resource ourselves back up where those resources need to go and make sure that we have rebuilt our workforce by filling those vacancies before we start to address potential increases. And the only exception to that is the potential uplift this year of reallocating resources into some of our core service areas, and we'll get into that in a little bit around policing and fire inspection, public safety, and then beautiful city, some beautiful city elements like code enforcement. And so the theme is recognize that we have a significant, historically low staffing level relative to our authorized strength. Get ourselves resourced back up before we start to contemplate growth in our positions outside of reallocating into some key specific areas that our public safety departments are recommending to us that we make some changes to address those core services.
Thank you for that explanation. And I also want to address a couple of things from both Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Baker. You know, Mayor Pro Tem, you asked about how, you know, the industry that for, you know, public municipal governments, in terms of employees. I mean, I've been hiring at 2 different organizations over the past 2 years, actually almost a full year hiring consistently, almost having interviews every few weeks, the expectation is to have hybrid. And so that is something that I would expect that we would try to accommodate to the extent possible in order to continue to be able to attract our employees in jobs that can accommodate that. So just wanted to give that input to you. And I would say that even when I arrived at the city as a staff member in 2011, I had never worked so hard. Well, as a consultant, yes, I worked very hard. I didn't anticipate I'd be working just as hard on the public service side. And so, from my experience working for 11 years for 3 different municipalities, staff works hard, and especially now, there was an uptick, surprisingly, in the work that had to be done over the, even during COVID. And, there was a lot of transition, a lot of learning of how to handle your work virtually. But even once that was tackled, there was still a ton of work coming in. And the world didn't slow down, it sped up. And so, to Councilor Baker, your point of we should just be working faster, harder, we are working faster, harder. And I just want to recognize that of all municipalities, there's a lot of work to do, and there are less people to do it. And hiring right now is very difficult. And there's just a couple of people for jobs versus 50 to 100 before. So let's all continue to have perspective for the fact that right now there's only so much one person can do, and I want us to be thinking not about just cutting and making people do more. They already all are doing more. And I imagine as a pharmacist there was a point where you could only do so much. And so I want to continue to have this perspective with our staffing. Yes, we want to be efficient, but we also want to retain staff and get our work done responsibly. So, thank you.
I think to add to that discussion, one of the things that I'd like to see long term is matching the growth to core services. So I think that our strategic plan is very clear that we want to focus and hone in on core services. So if there's growth in areas that don't fall within the strategically agreed upon plans of what those are areas where maybe we focus in on, is that the right place for growth? Because I think matching it with metrics such as calls of service makes sense, because then it's okay, did we have as much growth in those parts of the organization when we see the calls of service increase? I think you could do that the same with, say, requests for fixing of potholes or graffiti response, or any of the things that we are saying are priorities. So I'm not necessarily opposed to growth, but I want to make sure that the growth is in the right place and it matches up with the strategic plan. So I'd be curious, even with the areas where we have gaps in employees, and I think Manager Andrews, you've been very smart about that as far as looking at some of the cuts that you have done, saying these are areas where we didn't fill that spot's existed for X amount of years, so is that the right place to even have money tied up for an FTE if we're not using it? So I'd like to just be very surgical, I guess, in how we look at it and see where's the growth in requests for services, and does it match our strategic plan? And then, have we put the growth behind the workforce that in the right places, I guess.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for the feedback. Just as providing another comparison for discussion today, we plotted the number of FTE with the sales tax revenue. This doesn't match perfectly because there's a whole number of revenue streams that come in, but we wanted to just give you one other visual as we talk about staffing. The next slide slide 12 shows our staffing history by department. Mayor?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
If we adjusted the blue bars for in inflation, how would they lie? Without any specifics, one would think that they match the red line much closer in every circumstance. Don't worry, don't worry,
Yeah, I'd have to
don't worry.
think about that.
If we adjusted the sales tax for inflation, they'd push all the lower ones up.
Let us think about that and see if there's a way we can show that.
It's like your mind readers.
So
They have you
so
bugged.
this one, slide 12, our staffing history by department, shows a lot of information on one slide, and it can be a little bit difficult to digest because there's been a lot of shifts that we can't pull out and necessarily show apples to apples. So like community development, you see the green bar where they increased in staffing. That was when code enforcement moved from the police department to community development. Certainly we've had shifts like that over time. Human resources came out of the general services department and started. Policy and budget shifted into the general services department, so we have a number of intricacies like that. But we did want to show just across the organization by department where those staffing levels are and where they've trended for the last 8 years.
And is this budgeted staffing, not necessarily filled
This is
staffing?
authorized staffing.
Correct.
I think that's just an important call out, and if anyone's listening in the public, just so that they understand, because we talk often specifically in police about how shorthanded we are, and this graph would make it look, if you didn't understand that it's budgeted, that could be confusing to folks.
Chris, if I could also add, Barbara Opie, Deputy City Manager. One thing this also reflects, and it doesn't go all the way back to the time period the previous slides show, but it does reflect that from that point the mayor had made about the 72 reduction that was done between 10 and 11, that as those positions were added back, they were strategically added in the places where we had the greatest need aligned to the strategic plan goals and operating priorities. So they didn't necessarily go back where the positions had been previously reduced. So we have been deliberate and intentional in trying to make sure we're addressing those priority goals.
Quick question. So over the years, some of these positions some of the employee positions have transferred departments, like you're now in general services, right? So how does that, I'm sure it's very complicated, but how do you account for like the number of transitions from departments and the people? Do you follow what I'm saying? Like last year you were specifically in policy and budget, and now you're in general services. So does that count as one? Like, how do you count that? Are you now in general services and you count it as one, and you're out of the policy budget?
Right, so that's a great question, thank you. So looking specifically at policy and budget, for example, you see the neon green and dark blue lines there. So those are not in general services in 2020 and 2021. And then you'll see the orange line in general services going up, and then policy and budget is non-existent. So where they were at that time is where they are shown. So
Okay.
policy and budget in 2020, 21 was its own department, so they're shown there. So that it matches, if you open up a pay plan, you can match it to that.
Okay, so
And
when
then-
we take the snapshot of year by year, is that year end? So by December of 2019, then you take a snapshot of here's how many people are in there.
It's what we budgeted at the beginning of the year.
Oh, okay, so beginning. Okay, thank you.
Except for 2022.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, continuing forward. staff and our leadership team in the city manager's office have worked together to look through the strategic plan, those strategic priorities, certainly the priority core services, and come up with a list of position requests that we think match the needs for services and the strategic plan outcomes. We've come up with 2 different options, and certainly there's a number of iterations we could go through with these. But we've identified 16.9 positions that we think are necessary to provide the level of service that's been requested by both the public through the community survey and the strategic plan. Jody, do you want to add anything here?
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. These are really intended as the starting point for discussion, and it ties back to what I said perhaps about 10 minutes ago. Really potentially go with 2 versions of the flatline staffing options, or authorized staffing, meaning spend this year resourcing back up, reestablishing ourselves post-COVID in terms of our service delivery and such, with the focus directly on the strategic plan. So what you see is in option A, we'll go through these, is exactly that, a flatline staff. So we would resource back up, and then you would consider, if you wish, adding strategically some positions to address core services and respond to our community survey and meet our strategic plan, mostly in the areas of public safety, but also in the areas of beautiful city and other core services such as utility billing, to allow us to really continue to implement the changes that we've talked about around water billing, transparency for our community, so business intelligence position to allow us to open up our government and our work to have it be more accessible to our public. That's dashboard, better access to our data and communications. And then, of course, streets and streets inspections ties back to the sidewalk comment from earlier, but generally all of our streets. So as we ramp up our streets funding, we also want to ramp up our ability to make sure we're getting the work done in the field properly. But the bulk of the positions that we're presenting for you to consider come from our public safety departments, police and fire. You can see a significant grouping of police positions, traffic accident investigations, body-worn camera technicians, 2 of those, a victim's advocate, court security, which is critical, and then we move into fire. One of the interesting things that may have struck you in the previous graph is that our fire services positions have relatively remained very consistent for quite some period of time. And so our new chief, Menard, has worked with us and his command staff to identify 3 critical positions that would allow them to respond to, have the crews get more time in the field to respond to service calls versus inspections, for example. And so some of these, and also ramp up field training for the positions that are in the field, as well as we have ramped up equipment needs in fire, and so we would seek a logistics officer position in fire for that purpose.
So I'm assuming for every job we have a justification for it, and I'm curious for, like, it would just be helpful to know what are we aiming for with respect to, let's say, a relationship between like traffic accident investigator and number of crashes that we have, or / population, or whatever, relate. And it's typically, right, we have some type of 1.0 FTE per 6,000 residents or whatever, to have some understanding of, well, what is our service level that we're trying to meet or get to with these positions. And I think similarly you mentioned like an impact to response times, so that would be helpful to say, oh, we're trying to improve our response times to get, to maintain our fire, our whatever the IS, oh my God, I'm forgetting the acronym for the ISR, the whatever, the ICE, our rating of 1. But yeah, it would be, right, like I'm trying to reach for we usually, when we were doing the comp plan, for example, years ago, we'd talk with fire and police about, I know that they have standards and service standards that it would be helpful to just add in here for us to know.
When I'm looking at these, one thing I'm curious about is like what parking enforcement means. We've talked on a couple different areas around how we do enforcement of different things. Example, with council wanting to do and actually that's another question for where this fits in, because it was something that came out of strategic planning, was to have the non-sworn report writers for the police department. Along that same lines, I'm curious what parking enforcement means, because I recall a similar discussion that maybe hasn't been with the whole group yet about looking at, is parking another area where maybe that's a load we could take off of police officers that are the sworn officers that we need to, respond to active criminal activity. So I'm just curious what that means, and then also where that priority that came out of planning is at.
Thank you for the question, Mayor Pro Tem. There is a sheet, a handout.
That's ours.
That's ours. We can make available a handout for you that does provide a position summary. In terms of parking enforcement, we put it under Beautiful City. It's primarily intended to assist the police in responding to abandoned vehicles in neighborhoods, and we've had an increasing rise in those. We've had a rise in those dramatically in terms of what bothers the neighborhood. So abandoned RVs, abandoned trailers on streets, or unsightly or unkept ones, or broken down ones that just never get moved. And we're finding that we need additional resources. We have, I think in that case, we overhired a position, or a part of a position, to address this, and now we'd like to make it permanent, because we're finding that call load is not going down. For some reason, we're getting more abandoned vehicles in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, and and I think that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that, but I guess along the same lines of some of the stuff that we've seen, say for example, the one that comes to mind is the dog park off of Sims, where people are illegally parking, and the big problem with it is it really is a safety concern for the neighborhood, because there's just not enough in that instance. If you go up to Sims close to 100th, where 100th crosses over Sims west of, it's very dangerous for people to park right there. However, they do it consistently. And so my opinion is, and obviously this is something that council could weigh in on, is if you consistently make sure people get ticketed, eventually they're going to stop parking there. If it's just like sporadic, but we don't have necessarily the manpower, and this is back to like an opportunity to reallocate resources as far as who takes care of that problem. So instead of people calling the police every time, if we had someone who was actively looking at parking throughout the city, and that was the idea I think I brought up recently, and it just we haven't had a meeting where it made sense to bring it up yet. But I think of other cities where you have parking enforcement. Granted, we're not downtown Denver, but why not have a vehicle that is marked parking enforcement that drives around the city, or two of them per day, that addresses both abandoned vehicles as well as parking violators. And I have to imagine there would be some more efficiency as far as finding those abandoned vehicles if you had people that their job was to drive around the city and see where people were parking. They would see, oh, that RV's been there over the allotted time. Because I think that's one of the other areas that I know we have a code as far as like the RVs and stuff, that I think during COVID that was very much neglected. And I'm not saying that I love the RV parking, but I understand why we have it. But if we're going to have something, we should enforce it, or we should look at changing it. And so, but that's just another good example of where if you had somebody that was their job, they would see those. Because I could tell you, like in the countryside neighborhood since COVID, there's probably just on my street, probably 4 different RVs, whether they're ones that are motorized or they're the pull behinds, that have been there pretty much since the pandemic started. And I I think part of it was people were using them if they got sick, that they were sleeping in their RV versus being in the home and affecting other people. So I don't know if now's the right time to really enforce that, but it's just an example where I feel like there's an opportunity to do better. And so that's why I really want to understand what we're doing if we're going to allocate dollars to people. Because then if you play that further, maybe there's dollars to a couple vehicles too.
So Mayor Pro Tem, I think, yes, we agree with everything that most everything that you've stated. So the goal here is to get the sworn police officers in the field doing the work that they should be doing. Have a dedicated parking enforcement officer, and this would be in community development. We'd co-locate this with the code enforcement group that is one-stop shop then for folks in neighborhoods and wherever else to have these types of concerns addressed. And then that same group of folks that's out and about looking for code violations and others works together to enforce those parking regulations. And you're right, the same person that's able to see, trends and ticket and make that a consistent experience.
That's great. That's fantastic to hear. The other thing that I wanted to at least bring up, because I think it blends into being able to fill some of these positions specifically around PD. So I know I recently brought up, and I just recently saw this, what our neighboring cities, the one that comes to mind is Arvada, what they're doing in order to attract people into law enforcement. And it looks like they're more gearing it towards people who aren't necessarily in law enforcement. It looks like they're targeting younger people who are looking for that career, because they're targeting programs that are around college, tuition reimbursement. And I think that we need to figure out how we're going to be competitive in that. I think that's one of the reasons you probably have seen, well, for one, Denver is a different experience, and so depending on, how busy you want to be, that might be a department that you go to, and I think we've seen that consistently through the years. But one of the other things that Denver offers that most of the smaller cities don't is that kind of tuition reimbursement to go to college and get an education in that field. But now we're starting to see that cities like Arvada are doing that, and I feel like if we're going to maintain being competitive to get the right people in, we're going to have to do the same thing. So whether it's next year or whether it's something we think about in the next couple of years, we need to start looking at that. And just for the record, that was an actual commercial that they're pushing out in streaming media saying, hey, this is what Arvada's doing. And there were some other little perks that were in their package that they were pushing. So I would be interested for us to do some research and see what they're doing, and if there are other departments that have started doing that as well. Because I think you've seen the trends, like Medigap came up because Thornton was doing it. So how are we not going to be competitive with Thornton if we don't offer the same kind of benefits? So.
I think this kind of blends what Councilor Normella and Mayor Pro Tem had said, and it sounds like you already have it, but for this and future budgets, I think when proposing FTEs or new positions, it'd be helpful to understand the job description. For example, business intelligent developer, unless I Google that, I don't know what the intended purpose is for that specific position. And so if we could kind of better understand what their purpose is, the description of what we see them doing, that would be helpful, because I know that you have transparency listed after it. But what exactly are we getting with, not with just that one, bless you, or all positions? I think it would be helpful. It kind of lends to what Mayor Pro Tem was saying about parking enforcement. I took it as, I just automatically reverted to like our downtown parking and what does that look like? And it sounds like there's more of a code enforcement piece to that. Parking enforcement. So it'd be helpful to truly kind of get a description of what we're intending these positions to be. What was the other one? I think that's it for now.
Just to make sure we're clear, the budget document, the proposed document will include a detailed description of any new positions that are recommended to be added. And we're prepared to give you a description of any of those that you'd like today.
And it's not just the description for me, it's like, what is your service level that you're trying to improve or reach? You know, if population has changed or if other issues have changed. And I think that goes to my comment here. You know, I was sitting here thinking, okay, when I just said, you know, do we need another traffic accident investigator because there are more crashes? If there is an increase in safety or lack of safety on our streets, we should also, in addition to thinking about how do we address it right now with a person, we should also be thinking about how do we address it with actual changes to our streets through some type of, you know, are we looking at a, you know, net zero kind of, or what is the, I'm sorry, I'm so tired this morning that I cannot, huh?
Isn't it Vision Zero?
Vision Zero, sorry, my brain is not firing here. So should we be looking at a Vision Zero concept for Westminster so that we're tackling those streets and maybe putting some in our budget, some consulting dollars aside? I know there's also grant funding out there right now, a lot of grant funding for transportation that we could be leveraging to address this issue on two levels.
Well, and I think part of that too, the Vision Zero, I believe, is in our transportation plan. So some of it lends to the documents. Well, I think you alluded to it before, like the comprehensive plan, and so it's not just strategic plan. And correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to speak for staffer Heath here, but I believe that we already have that kind of laid out in all of our documents as far as what we're trying to accomplish. So.
Great, so maybe we should focus a little bit on implementing those policies if we do actually have a Vision Zero policy.
Okay, we're doing both option A and option B, right? We're talking about both option A and option B, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what are the 17 jobs we're reducing in option B? I don't seem to see a listing of them here.
Thank you for the question, Councilor Baker. The intent to address that would be if council directed us to go to option B or a version of option B, what we would commit is to work with our leadership team over the next 5 months to deliver X number of positions if you so instructed. And that would allow us to do that intelligently through the organization rather than have us pick positions out of a list. We would ideally curate vacant positions similar to what the mayor described post-recession. But we would do that in relatively short order and time for the start of the budget year. So in other words, the department heads would deliver vacant positions to match the cut.
Okay, and my next question is if we're running at 12.4% vacancy right now, that's roughly 131 jobs, right? Trust my math. It's 131 positions, okay? And some of them have been vacant a couple months, and some of them been vacant probably 6 months, depending on the difficulty of hiring for the position at all. So and obviously, whatever core services were going to be delivered by that person aren't being delivered. Okay, so my wonder is, with 130 vacancies right now, and there used to be more, I would think we have far more than 17 positions we could cut. Far, far more than that, because we haven't had them.
May I thank you, Councilor Baker, for that question. That is a really important topic for us, and we would appreciate the opportunity to drill into this a bit today. The vacancies are ever shifting. For every person we hire, we are still roughly losing almost one a day. We hire one a day, we lose one a day, so that list changes daily, our vacancy list. There are a couple of areas that your observation is very accurate with respect to some of those positions that have been vacant for quite some time, and I think specifically of the policing positions. Our police officers were still down a lot of positions in police officers. What I would say is that the test is the test of whether we're delivering or how we're delivering core services with reduced staffing is not, it doesn't match that's the right staffing levels. We're currently providing core services really on the backs of our current employees. So we have a lot of overtime, we have a lot of double shifts, and we have a lot of people working 5, 6, 7 days a week, what Councilor Normella described through COVID. We altered our shift schedules significantly. We're now doing staggered shifts to provide coverage with less people. So that means more hours for folks. And so that we're providing service with 135 vacancies. It is really a testament to the current employees that we have. I would also say, again, in recognizing +1, -1 roughly a day on average, that our workforce is ever evolving. So we're, as many people as are leaving are joining. So if we've hired a person a day in the last 10 months, our workforce has significantly changed already. Even in less than a year, we have 20 to 30% new people in those positions, and they come in with energy, and then we burn them out because we're so short-staffed, and then we lose them. And that's why it's been so slow for us to stem that vacancy rate. We have drawn it down from 15% to 12.4 with some Herculean efforts in our recruitment group and human resources and all of our hiring managers. But if we don't address the short staffing levels, we will continue to see those kinds of attrition rates because our folks are moving to the market is very hot for local government positions across the board, and they will go to an employer that's more stable in terms of its workforce and not stay with us. And we're working very hard to address that, but that's one of the challenges with being so short-staffed. I hope that answers some of your observations. We're accurate.
Are we using the wrong standards for the hiring? Has that been, I don't want to say research, but has that been looked at, that maybe we have the wrong standards in place if hiring is so difficult? And have we looked at, I know that we have made some of this up in overtime, but a lot of these needs are very subjective judgments. And just because that was the old standard we were using, has we thought maybe that's the wrong standard? I would imagine that we have some kind of standard that we want between the hours of 3 and 11, we want 17 patrol units on our street of road police, right? We must have something like that.
I would just say from my perspective, in each of those areas, as we look to hire any of those, we're looking at what are the standards of providing that service and where can we squeeze out every bit of manpower, and what are the standards of hiring so we can get people on as soon as we can in some of these areas where we have really critical levels of vacancies. So from my perspective, yes, we're looking at those every day.
Have we made any changes recently?
One example, Councilor Miller raised it. We have had to become more flexible with remote working and hybrid environments because the market's demanding it. And we have, in terms of standards, we set a standard for 100% physical in the office. For a planner, for example, the applicants will say, well, why? And not join us because another 5 employers around us offer hybrid work environments so that they can have a more flexible work environment. So we may not want to do that, but if we want to attract, I'll just say that as an example, if we want to attract that planner, we've been finding ourselves addressing our standards in terms of being attractive in the workplace.
Thank you.
Couple comments on this. One, I'm curious, or one quick question. When we're doing like exit interviews, are we seeing any trends? Are we losing people to private sector? Are we losing people because of the job? Are we losing people because they got a better position? I know that's hard to actually drag out of people why they're really leaving.
Mr. Andrews, if I could respond to that, sir, and then I have a couple of other data points based on the earlier discussion. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, we are tracking our exit interviews. We do those anonymously, and the the responses are not sort of fill in the blank, they're check the box. So our exiting employees have an opportunity to be real candid with why they're departing. And we're seeing parallels to what is happening across the country. Retirements, of course. We just sent into retirement last month our fire chief. Everybody's aware of that, very visible. So a lot of retirements, and then folks relocating to other parts of the country. As we all know, folks have transitioned to other parts of the U.S. and the state of Colorado to perform comparable work. And so we're seeing trends there. We report this every month to our interim city manager from Human Resources. So yes, we're not seeing any outliers there, but we want to be very cognizant of what's happening there. We are getting some feedback from some folks that, doing a lot of extra work. We have had a few folks exit because of some of the things that Mr. Andrews described. I'd like to also add just a couple of the things that we're doing in our hiring process. Just take police, for example. In addition to our hiring bonus, we're also doing a rolling recruitment process. So our hiring for Westminster police officer is open at all times. We used to do that at specific times during the year and hire groups of officers, and now we're hiring them at any time an application comes in. We'll be screening that. So those are some of the things that we're doing to adapt. I also wanted to add that of the vacancies, the number that you heard, 26 of those vacancies are police officers. And I think it's quite visible, the call load increase, and then also, the recruitment is very, very challenging. So the question about the burden to the individual can also be scaled from our police department across all of our services as a city with fewer people and having those vacancies. And so, I just wanted to comment on each of those and kind of how they're being impacted, both call load, staff loads, et cetera. And I'll just close by saying the other thing we're doing at Westminster is benchmarking ourselves across other cities in Adams and Jefferson County, and I can tell you that our police staffing levels, as challenging as they are with all of those vacancies, we are favorable, leading, and doing better than our neighbors in terms of total staff level, and then also in law enforcement. So we're working very, very hard to do that and measuring ourselves against others. Thank you.
Great. And just a couple of opinion comments when you talk about around like policing in general. Like I think, and this is what makes exit interviews difficult, because most people don't want to burn their employer down when they leave, nor do they want to, talk poorly about it, knowing they're leaving people behind that, were colleagues that they likely care about and have a relationship with. What we've seen in the exit in policing in general, and I don't think this is a Westminster phenomenon, but I do think we have some control over it, is you see people leaving policing altogether. And there's been this bad tendency by folks nationally to just be like, oh, well, they just decided they don't want to police anymore. I know some of these individuals personally that we've lost, and they're people who intended on having a 30-year career in policing. So understanding not all of that's under our control, I do think the more that we do to say we're going to back our people, we're going to do the things that allow them to actually go do the job and that they want to sign up for as far as law and order, is going to want them to stay in policing, and that's really the goal I would like to get to. The other thing that I want to bring up as far as trends and the way that we're doing policing, I think one of the concern first I have is too much overtime. You have people who are getting burnt out, and that's a dangerous job to be burnt out in. The other thing that I want my colleagues to think about why it's so important to me is there is a level of people aren't going to commit the crimes if there's visible police presence. I don't think we need to, have a policeman on every corner, but if there could be an officer who drives by at some point, you're less likely to steal two people's car while they're out to dinner, as an example, because if there's a policeman right there, people are less likely, they don't, want that confrontation. They don't think they're going to be challenged typically when they go to commit those kind of crimes. It's the same with what we've seen over the last couple of years with traffic. And I mean, that lends to like how many traffic issues that we have, because people don't seem to think they're going to get held accountable. I'll give you an example. This wasn't in our city. I was in Aurora yesterday afternoon visiting my sibling, and they have a stop when you get on 225 where you have to wait for the light. Light was very long timed. The light didn't turn, so the guy next to me decided to go. There was a police officer who followed him on and he ran it right in front of him. And so if we have that kind of thing going on, who's going to take it serious? And I'm not one who thinks we have to have speed traps everywhere, but I do think that people need to understand that we're maintaining that kind of law and order, but it also is going to take us figuring out the magic sauce to get people to want to come here to fill those patrol cars. But it does lend to some of these bigger problems, and it expands over the realm of the different things that we've brought up, such as traffic, because people aren't going to drive like that if they think that they might get a ticket. But if they think they're not going to get a ticket, it's going to be like Mad Max in the Thunderdome out there. And that's unfortunately what we've seen over the last 2 years, the way people drive. So I want to, just be realistic about some of that and why it's important for us to address it. And it's, there's a lot of different things that's going to impact.
I just go to bed at night thinking I'm in Paris on the Autobahn. Because I hear Westminster Boulevard, 104th, 112th, and US 36. It's a toss-up of who's drag racing the most. Well, and you can't drive 36 without going 85 or you'll be run over. My questions were parking enforcement. If we're going to have people driving around, they need to have eyes, not just for gas is expensive. So these people, if they see the other things that other code enforcement people need to take care of, the trash at the dumpsters that we hear about on Turnpike Drive, they see weeds, they just keep a notebook and let the team know, because people, I think, are most upset that they have to keep reporting it. So if this person's going to be driving around, they need to be in, we know a core of the city that has problems, but there's probably problems everywhere. So if we say they're going to be driving around, they better be pretty darn visible. And I don't care if they're riding in an orange something, they need to be visible. Otherwise, we need to do a fantastic marketing job, just as we have with the graffiti and the homeless app and whatnot, to let people know exactly where to go. Again, I don't want these calls going into 911. They have enough calls, but we need to strategically point people to where they can go to get action, not 4 days from now, but the next day after they report it. So, and my question is, with code enforcement, is 1.4 enough? I mean, the Midland building is graffitied again. I saw graffiti all the way down here. Either, if we want to help keep an areas clean, we have to be vigilant. And how do we do that? And if we have code enforcement that, I don't know what the magic number is, but my question is, to do the job that we're expecting to get done, is 1.4 enough for our community? I don't know. I'm not afraid to have them come back and say, I need 2 full-time people. I'd rather have that than continue with people being irritated and frustrated, and they don't know how to get their neighborhood cleaned up.
Yeah. So if I could clarify, both on the 1.4 and the 0.5 on parking enforcement. So those will actually be 3 total FTE. So we're taking vacant positions in both areas and combining them. So that will be a total of 2 new code enforcement officers. We're converting an 0.6 administrative position into that as we look at needs for services and where those vacancies are. In addition, that parking enforcement will be a 1.0 40-hour-a-week person. Again, we're taking a half-time position that we believe we can do without, and combining that to make 1 total parking enforcement And that'll be
That's super
three total new people on that code enforcement team that will be able to cross-communicate, right, as the parking enforcement person is out and about and can communicate with code and back and forth.
And may I add one, this is an important clarification. People may not all understand how we structure ourselves. Currently, the police department handles all on-street parking issues. So with what Mr. Lindsay described, we get more resources into non-police on parking enforcement on street, allowing our officers in the field to do what you described, Mayor Pro Tem, be able to not be involved in parked cars, but actually be addressing more criminal activities and have a more mobility in neighborhoods.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question on the 17? And one, that's really good, because when I look at this, that's not where my mind went. So knowing what that 0.4 actually gives us, the head count, and I think we're keeping our head a little higher level, which you probably want, to be honest. But with that said, the 17, where did that number come from? Like, so if you're going to go back and say, to Councilor Baker's point, like, and I'm not saying that I want deeper, I just want to understand why 17 is the number, because I'm kind of open to looking at, going back and saying, like, I think that's a useful exercise in any organization every time you do a budget, to say, do we have the right people? And when I ask that question, that's both ways. Like, are these the right positions, whether we keep them or not, especially if they're vacant? And then, go from there. I know that's difficult in the, when you're budgeting it, because you want to know that you have the budget to hire to it. So point being, where does the 17 come from, and what kind of flexibility does that give you throughout the next year? Because I would like you to do that exercise one way or another, to then come back and say, you know what, actually we decided, and maybe you come back and say, we decided actually we probably have 25 positions we don't need, or maybe it goes the other way. Like, how does that look, and where did that number come from?
So the number is really driven by, again, the drivers set out by City Council, the strategic plan, the core services. So we started by looking at, do we have the positions in the right place? And so the 17 positions you see on the list to the right of the graph are the positions that we feel we need to put resources into in order to better meet and fast and more quickly address the core services needs that we have in this city. And what we've the offsetting positions, if council directed us to go to option B, is really simply a match, right? So that we don't increase our staffing levels in order to reprioritize. Very similar to what I presented on the $2.2 million reductions in city managers and leadership position salaries to fund critical and core services. This would be a similar approach, but driven the other way around. So we identified the core positions that we need, and then if you directed us to, we would then commit to deliver offsetting reductions in our workforce positions by the end of the year. So we would match, if you told us to, we would match those 17 adds with 17 deductions through curated vacancies over the next 5 months with our leadership teams. And we would do exactly what you described. We would look at areas of need and prioritization and use that as a way to determine. If we did that today, it would be a very artificial and inaccurate list, because it would be today's vacancies. When we're seeing a vacancy a day rise, we are able to do a much better job of, if that was so directed, of pulling resources out and giving our department heads a chance to lead and reallocate resources by the end of the year to meet that goal. We would also commit, of course, to doing the larger exercise as we staff back up to make sure that we are, in fact, in the right zone and at the right staffing levels coming out of COVID. So many things changed with how we deliver our work and also our community expectations. For example, we reopened City Hall on Fridays for the first time in 10 years, but we didn't change our budget to do that. That's an example of how we can be innovative and reevaluate how we're providing our services with, in that case, the same resource levels. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of where the 17 came from. Those are driven by core service deliveries working in those three areas: public safety, beautiful city, and
It does. I guess for me, this is what I'm looking for. And I mean, I understand, ultimately it's our decision, but I'm really looking to you for some guidance. And here's the reason why. I am not I believe in thrift, and I, believe in running a tight budget. But what I don't believe in is cutting just to say that I cut and I have a tight budget. Because ultimately a lot of times you end up impacting services and quality of services. For example, I know this in my own job. If they say, hey, if I propose something that's a good mid-level solution and they come back and say, we don't want to spend it, I'll come up with a solution. But what I find is when you scrimp on certain solutions, you end up causing more work in the back end. And so what I'd like us to do as an organization is be more, thoughtful about what the next 12 months looks like, and saying, maybe we leave the levels allowed alone, but it's an exercise year that we go and look at the staffing levels. Because are we, like, for example, in the turnover, I know I've heard Manager Andrews, you reference like how often we're having to do the onboardings compared to how we used to do it. That's a lot of work. And so, like, if it's the same positions that we're restaffing, maybe that's a position that, we figure out what are they really doing and how can we do that, provide those services differently. And maybe it's not headcount. You know what I mean? That's just an example, but like, are the things that we're spending our time on, are we spending the money and the resources just to continue this wheel of people coming in and out the door? Is that money best spent? So I almost am leaning towards, let's leave them, but with the understanding we're going to go and really evaluate all those areas, and are there areas that are consistently vacant and why? Like, policing maybe is one. There's some different impacts, but I don't know all the areas where we're seeing those, but like I'd like to be a lot more thoughtful about looking at them and seeing why it is, and not just cutting to say that we cut, because I don't feel like that is probably the most productive way to go about it from my own experience and how I do things.
Councilor Bacon?
Yeah, first I'd like to amplify or really reverberate or whatever what Mayor Pro Tem said about making people work overtime. That does burn them out, and that is not good. And we should seriously consider foregoing other tasks than to have people work overtime. That being said, it's my understanding that both Arvada and Broomfield are less police staff than are we. Is that correct? Does anyone know?
Broomfield's smaller.
They have fewer officers per person than do we.
I don't know about Arvada. Arvada's a bigger city for one, so I don't.
They're 120,000.
I don't know. I know that they're running at the same. I was at a meeting where our chief and the Arvada chief were maybe about a month ago, and they had pretty much identical vacancy rates, but they didn't talk about total staff, so I don't have any idea.
Well, I point them out to illustrate the point I want to make, which is that I do not believe there's a direct correlation between staffing levels and safety. And I'll point to the car theft. Even if we all had the same staffing levels among the three cities, how does that explain the tremendously lower rates in Broomfield and Arvada? And what were they? Half ours? Half our car theft rate? Not that I want to solve that question now, but I pointed out that there's not a direct correlation between the amount of money we spend on law enforcement and the safety we get for our patients, people.
Well, I'm trying to run through that. I don't think that it's a direct correlation. There's other impacts that you have to think about. For example, our position next to highways, there's a lot of crime that comes through our city, unfortunately, because of where we sit geographically. We have two.
We also have shopping centers. We also have hotels. And both the shopping centers and hotels are target areas.
Yeah, so we could go.
No, there are reasons.
But we
There
could
are
go down
reasons.
that list. But my point was, it's not the end all be all. But if you think that somebody is willing to steal a car when there's a police officer sitting there versus whether there's not a police officer sitting there, we would probably have to agree to disagree, because
Well, I don't think anyone makes that.
so my point is if we have proper staffing levels and we have the right mix put out of how often you might see a police officer in a given neighborhood, you're going to have less crime. I mean, that's just a fact. I'm certain there's studies on that. So that was my point. I don't disagree. It's not just a pure staff level. If you had more police than everybody else in Colorado, but they're all sitting at the police station, that's not gonna. So there's more to it than just staffing. I would agree with that, but we do need to put resources behind it if we expect to be serious about addressing crime in our city, in my opinion.
And we need consequences. Sir?
If I could go back to the point before that discussion, and I can offer a recommendation today for you to consider as we move through. I know that we'd like to move from staffing to get into the other budget builder parts of this. Given that City Council is likely on the eve of appointing your permanent city manager, if I were to be the permanent city manager, in any case, I would appreciate option A. And option A is where you flatline staff at the current levels, but you consider upticking in those 17 areas that we've identified to address core services, and then instruct your city manager over the next year to review staffing and resourcing levels and report back to you. And that could be an inclusive process, as much as you would like to be engaged in that, or updated at the least. As your city manager, I would recommend that in light of this discussion and taking all questions and input into account, I would say option A is a solid option for you to instruct us. That would allow us to resource back up post-COVID, understand how we now structure ourselves, and but not paralyze ourselves on our core services. So uptick in those areas where we've identified today where we could really benefit from additional, a very modest additional resourcing relative to our staffing size. So that would be my recommendation for you to consider as we move into maybe the next sections of this morning.
Sir?
I could go with that. I would just say as we, as the next city manager is looking at this, I would want every department to establish metrics that we would be able to understand what are we impacting. And those metrics should certainly include our service, our quality of service, any timelines that are within our code especially, as well as our implementation of our plans, whether that's Vision Zero or whatever. Those should be really clear for us.
And maybe, sorry for Councilor Miller, for the public listening, it is very exciting that the city does have for the first time a strategic plan that has key performance indicators, and so we would tie, or KPIs, so we would tie those KPIs into this work very, very directly. So how are we staffing and resourcing to achieve the key performance indicators in our strategic plan?
Yeah, I greatly value that we have those. I would just also relate them to every department's work plan as well, because I know it goes beyond that. I think, our strategic plan doesn't cover, response times to people calling about, issues in their neighborhood, or it doesn't cover like how long does development review take, or what is I don't know if it has in there any impact to our call time, response time for emergencies, that kind of, I would just want to make sure it's expanded beyond just the strategic plan.
Okay. We are past break time. Let's take a quick 5-minute break, come back, and at this point, do you want to know if we want to go which option, or do we want to keep going through and then decide? What do you want? What's best?
If you're able to put it down now, we can move on to the other areas, or if you want to pause until we get through the other parts of the budget building, getting some indication for now.
We have one person that wants to hear more, so I'll address that issue when we keep going. 5 minutes. Okay, so are we good to, we want to hear a little bit more before we give you which option, but let's keep moving, and let's see. Are we at staffing and retiree health?
We are.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go.
Thank you. Larry Dorr, Deputy City Manager. For the third year, we've brought forward and discussed retiree health as an employer during the council's budget to report and then receive your direction. And you'll recall from a few years ago, this is enhanced retiree health, but also commonly referred to as Medigap. And this allows a retiree from City of Westminster employment to have medical insurance between the time of their retirement until age 65, when they would otherwise be eligible for Medicare. So hence the gap between retirement date and age 65. Over the last couple of years, we learned, as mentioned, I think Mayor Pro Tem touched on this a minute or two ago, that a neighboring agency brought forth enhanced retiree health. Our city then got direction from mayor and council to perform a cost study. We did that. We reported it back in the proposed budget, and this was added as a benefit for the workforce so that we can continue to be competitive in the marketplace. So here are our current eligibility requirements. Years of service plus a minimum age that allows for the benefit, a monthly stipend, a credit toward purchase of medical and dental coverage for the retiree. I'll report back that we do have this enhanced retiree health benefit began this January, and we do have 10 retirees in the program at this point. And that's right on par with generally our expectations. The city retained an actuary to understand the cost, and we reported that back to the mayor and council. So that's performing as you would have anticipated. What we wanted to bring forward here today and get your direction, and that's our theme for today, is to get your direction as we build the manager's proposed budget, is some modifications. We got some feedback from some of our employees that there's a little bit of gap between age and years of service. I'll just use an example. If you look at the eligibility requirements, a person who is 53 years old and has 25 years of service, they wouldn't be eligible for this benefit. And I won't do all the different scenarios for you, but the feedback that we got was that a simple rule of 80 with a minimum age of 50 would be helpful to the workforce and eliminate some gaps. And this is similar to pension eligibility in the Fire and Police Pension Association requirements. So what we suggest is a review of cost to determine if that will be substantial or manageable for our city as a matter of addressing the feedback that we got from some of those existing employees. And then potentially adding a service credit for municipal service elsewhere, up to 5 years, not 10 or 20 years of service, but up to 5 years, that this could be an attraction and potentially retention tool as well that will help us. We're trying to do everything we can to attract those employees. And I also wanted to just respond to a discussion earlier that we will perform a market scan between now and the city manager's proposed budget to understand tuition reimbursement and student loan relief, particularly in the area of law enforcement. It was mentioned Arvada is having an advertisement to this effect, and our team will do a market scan to understand those two things. Our city currently offers tuition reimbursement, which means as an active employee, if somebody takes coursework, they can be reimbursed for that college coursework, et cetera. That's different than student loan relief for a new employee coming aboard. So we'll just try to understand the market there, but would be happy to answer any of your questions and get your direction on pursuing a cost estimate for these things and bringing it back for your decision.
So you'll look and then if you'll tell us the pros and the cons.
We will.
Okay.
Yes, we would use the same consultant to help us understand the estimated cost.
Okay. And counselors, especially Mr. Baker, if we talk straight into the microphone because they're having trouble hearing us online. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you for bringing this back. I know I had asked in the past about potentially expanding this benefit to attract people, specifically in law enforcement. And so I'm curious is there room to potentially look at particular departments where you might do something different, and what the complexities around that are. And the reason I think that there's an opportunity here is with us losing so many people, not just us, but people across the board in law enforcement, part of the challenge is losing the years of service and experience. If you add up all the years of experience that we've probably lost as a department, it's pretty substantial. So if we have the ability to, say, get a 10-year officer from another department, I feel like it would make sense to look at these kind of tools as ways to attract those folks so that we're getting more of the laterals, which is on the other end of what I talked about earlier, where you're trying to get people who are going into the career. I think just as much, if maybe not more, we want those, laterals who already have years of training, because you're getting a more valuable employee because they already have experience. So I like this, and I'll like your recommendation, but I would like, if I have support, to look at how we push that, or at least get some numbers back around if we could do a little bit more in public safety for this benefit.
Mr. Baker?
Yeah, this is for a stipend. Now, does that buy into the city's health plan or just a market health plan?
It buys into the city's health plan, yes.
Isn't there a huge negative aspect to that for our city health plan?
Well, there's a cost, and that's what we've estimated and reported to council in the past. We estimated about $200,000 a year on average for the first 5 years. We reported that, and that's what I would be bringing back to you in terms of performing a study.
Because I think for the city, and in some ways, though not as much for the employer, if we had a catastrophic case among these retirees, it could terribly impact our health plan, couldn't it?
Well, we have that risk today, in terms of our existing populations.
But as you get an older population, the risk of catastrophic failure increases. At least that's my understanding.
Yes, and the idea is that that person might be staying and working for Westminster and remaining on the medical roles, or retiring and allowing for transition in our workforce and change and adaptation. Either way, the person is there. But I said a couple of years ago that I didn't understand this as an attraction tool, but things have changed so much in the last couple of years. So that's why it's put forth as an option for the council here today.
And thank you for the number. That was very informative. And do you know the approximate cost of each of these 10 participants in the program?
Well, no, the stipend, I can tell you, averages about $6,000 a year, and then that's the direct cost, and then there's the indirect cost of having the older retiree, in the medical plan, and those two components add up to about $200,000 a year. One of the goals of the City Council is to make sure that this is a sustainable benefit that can be available for 5, 10, 20, or the indefinite future, while this is of value to the workforce and not something that becomes exorbitant and not sustainable going forward.
And would these of the retirees have viable options with a $6,000 stipend?
Yes, that stipend covers the city's the lowest choice, least cost option within our benefit package, and the amount of the stipend is competitive in the market. It matches what's happening elsewhere.
So we could actually increase the amount of the stipend for the participants in this program and save money at the same time if we chose to let them choose a market option.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question. Well, the issue with the stipend is we want to control the type of benefit, the benefit that's available, et cetera, as opposed to paying out cash. It's really a credit toward purchase of the city
Right,
benefit,
but I mean,
which would
if
be
we
the most
paid out
popular.
cash and they bought it someplace else, okay, wouldn't it cost us less in the long run?
I don't think that's going to be generally of interest to the retiree. They're familiar with their medical plan that they have during their work years. We also allow for, at the cost to the retiree, the ability to have dependents covered as well. So, yeah, that what you described, that benefit design, is not present in the market. The market is generally the enhanced retiree health that the city has today.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Are we okay with this to move on? We're okay with this, so thank you. Next is operations.
Thank you. So as we discussed on Monday night, with CU Boulder and the projections, there were a lot of inflationary costs that are happening in this economy, and there was a question raised of how does that impact our expenses. So what we wanted to show right now is a few existing operational expenses and what is happening to them as we move into 2023. So we have a few expenses categorized, and the first one you see there is infrastructure in Beautiful City, and those costs that are significantly increasing as we move into 2023 to maintain existing kind of service levels and what we have been doing. So I don't want to spend too much time on these unless there's any specific questions on the first list on slide 16.
It would have been helpful if you would have put in what the base is and what the additions is, because as I read this, street operations, but I have no idea what that number is.
So that's a 4 million base.
Okay,
So
well,
that's
it would have been helpful if you'd put the base numbers in. And then two, isn't the downtown O&M on the GED that runs the downtown? There's a general improvement district of 50 mills on the downtown, and they're supposed to maintain their property.
Yes, sir. Generally, that's correct. I can't remember the revenue projection for next year for the GID, but yes, generally that should be paying for the O&M contract.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So slide 17 is more related to staffing. So showing that our regular salaries with the 5.5% projection that we discussed on Monday, the existing collective bargaining agreements. So the base of that is 94 million, increasing to 98 million. And then tied to that are benefits, overtime increase predominantly due to vacancies, temp salaries, predominantly in parks, recs, and libraries to get back to our existing staffing, programming, hours of operation, training, and then public safety recruitment is directly tied to our attrition and the amount of turnover we're experiencing. There's a lot more that goes into recruiting a police officer or firefighter versus a regular employee as far as background and additional testing that we need to do.
Questions on this one? I think we're a go. Oh, Counselor Baker?
Well, go first. Sarah raised her hand.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Okay, so the increases in salaries, that's in relation to all the 17 new positions, or is it just an increase?
This is just based off of the base, the authorized staffing level that we have in the amended 2022 pay plan, along with our regular merit increases, step increases, things of that nature.
Okay.
And then for me, again, we should have had the base here.
Were you done?
Oh, I'm
I'm sorry, I'm slow, Counselor Baker. I'm sorry. Like, I was just going to ask one additional question.
Okay.
So, the carryover that we had for 2021, did that include salary savings from our, from the way that Deputy Doran is nodding his head. Okay. So that, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that thought in my head. Go ahead.
Okay, and my comment was, it would have been helpful to have the base here. Because I have no idea how much overtime we're paying. Do you know offhand?
So the base for salaries was 94 million. So if
Well, no, for overtime.
the overtime base is 3 million.
So we're paying $3 million a year in overtime. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I just have a question on slide 16 because I was processing. The infrastructure increases, are these, I guess, kind of along the same lines of Councilor Baker? It would be helpful to just understand what is that buying us? Is that consulting, or not consulting, but is that contracts, or is it actual objects, cars, whatever? What?
So the street operations includes street lighting, snow removal cost, materials, those kind of escalations. And then we have an additional actual street rehabilitation that's going to be discussed in the capital improvement section. That was part of the reallocation, the $2 million reallocation that we did earlier this year.
You can keep going down the list.
So auto expenses, again, same thing, supplies, parts, fuel. We have contractual leases, or rentals, I should say, not leases. Downtown O&M is just the operations and maintenance there. Fire capital equipment, those are their ongoing equipment needs. Next Gen 911 is the ability to text and communicate with our dispatch center in more modern ways. So that's a new cost.
Is it like a new program, or just we're using cell phones instead of telephones? Like, what is
The
more
ability to
modern?
text.
It's what?
Ability to text specifically.
Okay, so it's like a program that we're, okay. Thank you.
So moving ahead to slide 18. These are core service expenses. The first one being IT, 2.6 million total, a 60% increase there, and that's a lot of the maintenance agreements that we have in the past. Any organization, not specific to the city, is you'll be able to purchase software. Now we're moving more towards maintenance, where you have to pay an annual subscription. Majority of that is Microsoft, and moving to Microsoft 365, requiring multi-factor authentication with any kind of federal grants that we have that requires different levels of security, and other programs. Sales and use tax software, which was mentioned earlier, new software that significantly modernizes the collection of our biggest source of revenue for the city, custodial maintenance throughout the city. We have custodial contracts in all of our facilities, bank charges, and then new transparency software that will allow us to allow citizens to essentially on demand get access to our financial data, and I don't want to say manipulate it, but display it in the way that they want to see it. So if they want to see what we're spending on, and then kind of drill into those expenditures. So that is a new service that we will be providing in 2023.
Sarah?
On the any of the new software, but particularly the sales and use tax, does that help us at all with the efficiency of our FTE?
Oh, yeah, we think that will help significantly. I should also mention that a number of these items have been approved for 2023
I remember.
in the past, and so Mr. Prasner here is just presenting them as cost escalations that you'll see in more detail. But yes, we're expecting to go live on the new software in the fourth quarter of this year. It will take time for our 9,000 tax-paying businesses to adapt to the new system and begin, we think, filing more online because it's a more user-friendly environment. And as that happens over the course of 2023, we'll continue to evaluate our efficiencies and staffing. We know that, let's see, Aurora, Denver, Boulder, Lakewood, and others who've used this exact same software have been able to see a lot of efficiencies in years, 1 and 2 after the new implementation. So we'll report that back.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move into some either enhancements or new programs that are as a direct result of the council strategic plan and the focused objectives. So on slide 19, through the next few slides, these are all focus objectives that are found in the strategic plan. And then you'll see cost escalations or new programs as a result. So for emergency preparedness, we have additional training, contractual services, primarily in our fire department with those increased costs, workforce resilience, additional personal protective equipment, and then workforce mental health resources in our public safety department.
Questions there, Mayor Pro Tem?
I have a question specifically around the mental health resources, which thanks for listening and having it in there. But my question specifically is around the resources that we use for policing. So I know that we have multiple resources depending on if they have to do like their evaluations versus if they just need somebody to go decompress to. Are those different resources? And the reason I think that's important to look at is if it's the same resource that might do an eval of the officers in the instance that they need to do that to make sure that they're fit to report to work, that maybe there would be hesitancy to use those resources on their own, I guess is the best way to put it. And I don't know if that's the case, but I'm curious around that because the goal would be that if they feel like they need those resources, they're able to do that and not feel like it's going to put them in a bind, because we want them to use those resources so they don't get into a place where their mental health is being affected negatively.
Thank you for that. Now, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure we'll communicate with the chief and get an answer shortly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I can tell you that it is a different resource. I just got confirmation for
It
that.
is great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So moving on to slide 20, you'll see safe and livable housing through proactive code enforcement. So that's our nuisances like graffiti and other code enforcement support. So in addition to the code enforcement officers, these are some additional costs that will help with that objective. The next one, homelessness. There are two aspects to this program. One is in the capital improvement program that we'll see later on today, and then these are other costs and programs that are presented by our Parks, Recs, and Libraries department to address homelessness. A housing stabilization fund, stays in hotels, a navigation assessment, so a consultant service to evaluate the effectiveness and feasibility of some of these programs, transportation costs, so if homeless camp cleanups, partner contributions with any nonprofit agencies, and some other miscellaneous costs as well. So those total about $1 million there, and those are ongoing.
Sorry, I had to juice up for this question. Okay, just kidding. Neighbor assistance, what is that? Up in the
Neighborhood assistance.
proactive code enforcement, neighbor assistance.
So that, yeah, we had a small pilot program for outside resources and relief for property standards related to issues in neighborhoods. And so we've had some successes with this concept, and then this is being able to more quickly address those
Okay.
remediation nuisances like graffiti.
Like the fence the improvement that we worked with the HOA, with the townhomes.
It wasn't an HOA, I don't believe, but
Okay.
yes, they did work with that neighborhood on the fence that kept getting tagged with graffiti.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then other immediate needs for homelessness.
Don't have that one off the top of my head, but I can dig into that one a little bit more and get some more.
It's like that miscellaneous folder, everything gets thrown in there.
The neighbor assistance program, is that similar? I don't know. On the neighbor assistance program, a couple years ago, I had a resident reach out to me about, they had a tree, I think got struck by lightning or something, and then I think they were contacted by code enforcement because it became a safety issue as far as like having the tree removed, and my understanding, and I don't recall what happened with it, but the gist of it was that she was asked to remove the tree. She didn't have the money to remove the tree. So is this money for things like that? And like what kind of programs do we have around that? And or do we ever offer our city resources? Because I know we have folks in Parks and Rec who do that for our property. So like if a resident gets into that sort of situation because of weather or whatever, do we have a program in place that helps them? Because I remember this instance, the lady was it was a senior and she didn't have the money to do anything about it. And, it was probably like 100-year-old tree or something that fell in her yard because of weather. I'm just curious if that would fall in that, or is that something different? Is that something we should look at and have a bucket of money for?
I believe that this is what this would assist with.
Cool.
Counselor Namella, if I can answer the question about immediate needs for the homelessness component. It's to help with the technological support, daily needs such as, but not limited to, food, hygiene, cold weather gear, move-in kits, vital documents, gift cards, etc. So it's trying to help them with that transition.
Great, thank you.
Do we have a baseline number on how much we've allocated to homelessness today? And if you don't have that, that's fine. It would be helpful to understand how much more we're increasing in this area.
I think it's important for community to understand too.
Yeah.
We need to be transparent what the costs are, and also while I'm thinking about it, are we, because of this month being a free fair, are we monitoring any influx or changes to any of our amounts of camps as of August 1st?
Mayor, in response to that last question, yes, we're actively monitoring. Our homeless navigators are out regularly. We do rely on our residents to bring it to our attention as soon as they see them. That allows us to begin our response and assistance part of our actions, and then move through that quicker or in a more timely fashion. Is pulling up the total cost, Councilor Emmons, of homelessness to date. I can re-emphasize that in that list of 4 service positions that we offered earlier this morning, have a look at 2 of those are park rangers to be deployed in our parks and open spaces to assist also in this exact area, responding to homelessness in a more timely and proactive fashion when those camps arise in our own public spaces.
I just thought with especially the train being a dead end, do we have officers that are down here around the time of that dead-ended train to just know if people come off and camp right there, or just wondering any activity that we've seen different? RTD's always asking, and Metro mayors are always asking, and since everybody said, oh, municipalities have to help because we don't have extra people, and I looked at them and said, and we're down 40 on any given day, so don't tell us about being down. I would just like to be able to keep track so that at the end of the month, when they ask if we saw anything, we have some data. Thanks.
So to get back on the homelessness, our existing costs are about $250,000. So this would increase that to about 1.25 million annually.
How much was the
$250,000, 250,000.
250,000 is total what we've been spending? And this all moves it to 1.25? Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to express my enormous disappointment with this. Earlier this summer, when we added an additional right now, before all this happened, we were spending at least $500,000 because we had a homeless staff person, we had a navigator, that's at least $200,000, maybe more, and we were buying hotel vouchers of at least $100,000. And then I don't know what all the other miscellaneous cost is. And then this summer, we added another navigator, we added a park ranger, we just gave $100,000 of HUD money to homelessness. And the whole point of us adding in early this summer was to reduce the problem, to reduce the costs. And here we see the costs are exploding. We don't want more homelessness. I don't find anything that I like about this homelessness.
Sarah?
It would be helpful to understand, just as we get in, a little bit further down the road, what the counties are also spending, like if they've seen a significant increase, and so it's not just us, that we know that the counties are amping up their efforts, amping up, I don't know.
I want to say my piece about the homeless thing. I understand the frustration, and I don't think the goal is to necessarily be a service provider. It's to work within the confines of the law and be able to deal with homelessness. So my real question is, are we seeing impact in actually reducing? And I don't think you're giving it enough time, Councilor Baker, honestly, to see the impacts of that. So I don't think that we're going to be able to fix this problem by not spending some money to have the resources to have people go out and actually address the camps as they come up. I mean, I understand we don't want this to be a never-ending story of we're going to have to keep spending more and more money, but we're going to have to give this some time to see impact. I've seen the impact and how quickly that we respond, and I have the fortune or misfortune, or however you want to look at it, of going through a couple of years on council where we weren't doing anything about it when people would respond. The answer was oftentimes COVID, which there was some legitimacy to that at some point, but then it was just kind of nobody was doing much about it, in my opinion. So I think that I've seen movement in it, and as long as we continue to see movement in the problem, then I don't mind spending money on it. But if to the concern, if we see like more and more camps and we're not addressing them, that would be a different story for me. But I don't know about my colleagues, but that's not what I've seen. I've seen us actually addressing it. I've got a lot of communication from residents that are grateful that we're taking care of it and we're doing it in as humane manner as possible.
And so shouldn't that mean we should spend less in 2023 than we're spending this year? Because we are having success. The bicycle hoarder up at Federal and US 36 is gone. We got the people out of the Palm open space. We're trying to get the people out. Shouldn't we be spending less next year than this year?
I think
rather
you
than
gotta. I think
increasing
you
by
gotta give.
200%.
I think you gotta give some flexibility and allow them to put resources where they've seen success and give it one more year. If it came back another year and we're talking about more increases, I would want to have a better understanding about why it's not going the other way. I just simply think it needs a little bit more time and leverage for them to take the learnings that they've had and see how we continue to navigate through a difficult issue.
I just know, talking to food banks too, it's not just what we regularly see. They're seeing inflation causing even more people to not have, they're having to make different choices than even what we saw during COVID. So we have other factors, I think, impacting. So I agree with Mayor Pro Tem. I think we just need some more time to see how it works out.
One other thing I would add, and this is from our learnings on Monday, my other concern of what we need to be realistic about is if the pessimistic forecast that we heard on Monday becomes reality of 2023, we need to be prepared for that, because it's potential, to the mayor's point she just made, that's going to make that even worse as far as how that impacts the public and potentially drives more homelessness if the economy falls out on us next year.
So the last slide for this section, slide 21, we have additional city events for $25,000 and cost to cover dog licenses for our residents, archival services at the library, some technological resources as far as more kiosks and things like that. And then this is where I mentioned the street maintenance and repair of an additional $1.2 million and a milling machine that will allow us to do more street repair.
Can I ask my question about sidewalks now? Do we have, I know some cities have they've basically cataloged all their sidewalks missing, not, inaccessible or severely deteriorated. So do they almost have, similar to how we have a pavement quality index, like they have a sidewalk quality as well? Do we have any, I know you might not know this, so I would be curious to know if we have that cataloged so that, because I see some sidewalks that are so bad, and it does impact our, that day-to-day experience in our community. So I'm just curious. And then obviously being able to tackle them, prioritize them.
Understood. We'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
So we've reached a point where we are seeking a little bit of direction whether these costs should be, as of right now, they're included in the 2023 proposed budget that will be presented at the end of the month. So unless there's any objection, we will proceed as presented.
Everybody thumbs up? Okay.
Yeah, as long as it has those service level information.
All right, so Mayor, we're at a point where we had scheduled for a break.
Do we need a break, or can we keep moving?
Plow ahead. All right.
Unless you guys need a break, we don't want to be.
So we will move into the capital section. So first, a couple of slides, again, to give you some a little bit more historical context of where we've been with our capital spending. So here's actual capital expenses for the last 7 years here, broken out by funds. Certainly, as we work through the strategic plan and understanding the balance of operating and capital, we wanted to present you a chart that compares the spending between those two and kind of the trend line where we've been. Certainly, we've seen less capital investment the last few years.
Would it be possible at some point, and I mean, it's not important for today, but to see the same graph, say, back 20 years?
Yep.
Thank you.
And I'm just curious why there's so much variation with the water and wastewater. I mean, I know that there's different capital projects that are implemented, but yeah, is there some rhyme or reason to that?
Okay, we'll follow up on those. So moving into the input phase here, staff is estimating we'll have available for general capital needs next year approximately $25.4 million. That's an unrestricted capital based on our current projections and operating expenses. Of that, there's a baseline of about $14.6 million that we have in recurring programs, projects, really recurring projects, that's broken out in this table that's on the right-hand side. So streets maintenance, transportation improvements, facilities maintenance, public safety infrastructure, information technology needs, and economic development projects that are funded year over year and analyzed year over year. That leaves about $10.8 million remaining in discretionary type capital funds for council to choose from. And we've put together from the requests from the departments a menu that totals about $16.2 million. That'll be on the next slide, slide 25. So there's 8 larger projects that we've identified here. So I'm going to go down, and I'm sorry, but I'm gonna read these just to make sure we're all on the same page. So first one, the Federal Parkway project that we discussed a little bit earlier. This would implement the study and the recommended improvements, such as the missing sidewalks, safety improvements. This project would provide a local match for grants to construct those multimodal improvements. The second project that's listed, Benton Street Phase 1 and 2 downtown. This would be roadway and utility infrastructure for West 89th, West 90th, Park Place, and Benton Street. This could be phased in over 2 years, and you see the cost identified there. Number 3, the Trailside Subdivision roadway improvements. This would implement construction improvements that were determined in a engineering study that was done this year to improve the roads and improve drainage in the Trailside Subdivision.
Where's that?
On the north side.
South of Stanley Lake.
No,
I don't know that I can get more specific. Roughly.
So south and east, because only Arvada is south of Stanley Lake, so south and east? Or just straight east?
Would it be along Independence?
We'll circle back on that one.
Thanks.
Thanks. Project number 4, 92nd and Eden Street improvements. This would improve the landscaping, streetscape, and roadway of the intersection at 92nd and Eden. Project number 5 is a renovation of the Rodeo Market that was discussed recently with council. The Rodeo Market's a building in historic Westminster that was purchased by the Housing Authority in 2009. The building has experienced quite a bit of deferred maintenance, is in need of a major renovation in order to attract a viable business to contribute to revitalization in historic Westminster. Project number 6, quiet zones at 72nd, Lowell Boulevard, and Bradburn Boulevard. This is the construction of quiet zones to meet the Federal Railroad Administration requirements to silence train horns at grade crossings of the BNSF railway.
I have to say, with our quiet zone up at 112th, I don't know what time of night it is anymore,
Yep.
because I don't have my 2, 4, and 6 a.m. trains.
Yep.
And it was my understanding the funds were allocated for this years ago.
I don't think so.
Because this is 72nd Lowell Bradburn. I have been repeatedly told the funds are there, we're just waiting on the railroad to let us do it.
I don't believe that's the case, but I'm going to have to check into that.
Thank you.
So the, going back a little bit, the trail side is just directly southeast of Stanley Lake, south of 88, between Wadsworth and Kipling.
Okay, so it's that little corner of Westminster with all the townhouses and homes like that. It's in that little sliver between the creek at the bottom, just south of 88 and 88 itself, and then west of Wadsworth.
There's a trailside park there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Project number 7 is the Jefferson County Homeless Navigation Center. Jefferson County is planning to build 2 navigation centers to provide 75 units of permanent, affordable, supportive housing, in addition to areas for transition. In 2023, we anticipate the city's contribution to the campus to be approximately $1 million.
Do we have a total cost? I don't remember what Jeff Coe's looking at for that.
Jody, do you?
And it's okay if you don't know it. I just was wondering.
They're working on that right now.
Okay.
You know, there has been a significant cost escalation, and I think really they're focusing on the first center now, and then we'll work on a plan for the second one. But we can get back to you on the current.
That's
state
okay. I
of
was
the
just wondering,
cost.
and because it makes me think, do we need to think ahead, or maybe we already do, to be contributing more as we go along? Because this, to me, is the key, Mr. Baker, to get to where we need to be for the homeless. Because if we don't have a place to offer to folks, then we're caught in having to get the hotel certificates and all that kind of stuff. So this is, to me, the critical piece of helping people, and I just didn't know what the total cost was going to be, and if we're looking at giving in multiple years, or I don't know what we've said we're going to do. So
I think we'll report back on that.
thanks.
Lastly, project number 8, fire station exhaust system replacement. This is the vehicle exhaust systems that are in our fire stations. They're on average approximately 25 years old. The newer systems clean the air more thoroughly and have less maintenance. This will replace all 6, the systems in all 6 stations, which would also help improve health and safety of those personnel. I did have just one note on there that we're getting close to maxed out for our project management capacity within our facilities division, so this might need to include additional funds to help manage this project, in addition to the rest of the maintenance that we have on deck for next year. So we have about $10.8 million available for these projects. We're looking for a bit of a prioritization from City Council as to those projects that are higher priority for you all. Mayor, I'm not sure how you would like to go through that. We provided the numbers to help. We saw that was successful on Monday night, so hoping maybe for something similar here.
Does anyone want to reprioritize from the numbers that are here?
I do. I would move the fire exhaust system up to number 2. And then I'd move the trails, and trail side can stay at 3, and everything else I push down to the bottom.
Lindsay?
A couple questions. The 120th to 122nd, is that grant funded? Because I believe that we went for grant funds. I don't know if that's been awarded or.
Yes, this would be the local match, and we're still also working for additional federal funds to help cover the local match.
Okay. And then the other question was for 7 for Navigation Center. Didn't we just allocate CDBG funds towards this?
Yeah, the 100,000.
I just need to know what extra is going into these projects.
So the amounts that are listed are the additional funds that are needed for those projects.
Okay.
That would need to come from the budget.
But there are already funds that we're looking at to try and fund those. I just need to know because here's the line of thinking in my head is that if we don't have anything towards rodeo market renovation, I feel like maybe that should be a priority, right? Since there's 10.8 that we need to prioritize.
Gotcha.
And if we already are looking at funds and grants at some of these projects, that helps weigh how I prioritize what's on the list.
Understood. So there's about $750,000 that's already $650,000 that's already available for the rodeo market project. This is above and beyond that what's already available. There's already been an amount spent on the Federal Parkway project. That's that the study that's already been done there. These are the amounts that would be above and beyond anything that's already available or the grants to complete these projects.
Okay. And in this order from 1 to 8, that's
So-
how staff prioritizes.
No, these.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
I did want to clarify because John just punched me. These have not already been prioritized.
Okay.
okay. And in your perspective, because I mean, all 7 of us will have kind of a different priority. We saw that with the Parks and Recs post on Monday. What would be staff's kind of first recommendation of like this? We're trying to get funds to accomplish this for X amount of years. What would be staff's priority as far as what would be first, second, third? And if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine. It's just.
I think you're probably going to get multiple different opinions here because
Sure.
we haven't discussed this as a staff.
I think the idea
Okay.
this morning was to tease out what council, if you had priority items that you absolutely wanted to make sure that we funded, then we would work from that down the list and present back to you, incorporating today's input from you. So if you have, like as Councilor Baker did, identify what you might see as priority projects moving forward, we'll make our best effort to capture all that input. And
So
then
maybe if everybody said their top 3?
I think that'd be very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilor Baker, you gave us the number 8 as one of your priorities. What else do you have?
The only other thing else I have is both items number 2 and 4 have to do with the new downtown. Our council needs to talk about the new downtown. If we're going to do anything different there, take a breath, Councilor Namella. We need to talk about it. Right now, it's been nothing but a money pit that has consumed the taxpayers' money of Westminster for a long time. Okay, and we need to talk about it. And then 2, on the rodeo market, we need to take the same hard-nosed approach there and talk about the market and what it could be turned into, or if our best course for our history and our city is to memorialize it instead of trying to renovate it and turn it into something useful.
Sarah, what are your top 3?
Well, I will just say city building takes time, it takes vision, and it takes effort. So, so a couple of things. I definitely the fire station exhaust system replacement, I think would be highly effective, so that would be one. The quiet zone at 72nd Lowell and Bradburn, particularly because we already have a Dr. Cog grant award for that. So when I see grant matching, we've got, it's a good amount of money, so I really want to see that happen. And knowing that with the, I have a couple of comments on these because I feel like we could get more than just 3 things done here. Federal parkway improvements, when I hear also that we have some matching grants and the potential to reduce our contribution for the local match by getting more grants, is that correct?
With the potential of a federal earmark, yes.
Great. So that would be something I'd want to see. Certainly for Benton Street, I would phase that, but I wouldn't prioritize it over Federal Parkway or the Quiet Zone or the fire station. And then regarding the Rodeo Market renovation, we have money towards it now. I just really want to see us work towards getting some type of grant to reduce the amount. I mean, I feel like we haven't quite explored what other funds might be available or tax credits or things like that. So I'm hoping that can be reduced.
Lindsay?
Let's see. My top were federal parkway improvements. This has been at the top of the list since I've been on council, I believe. So that would be one. The other one would be the Rodeo Market renovation. Next would be the fire station exhaust system. I know that we try to prioritize community needs outside our maintenance facilities, but outside our city facilities, and I think that prioritizing what we have in our capital buildings, I guess I would say, that's also important. And then I think my calculations were under 10, so I'm going to pick 4. So I'm going to go with the Quiet Zone at 72nd and Lowell as my next priority.
Quick
Sorry,
question.
sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
I've made a couple clarifying answers from earlier questions. Councillor Baker, we are coming back in September with options on the rodeo market to facilitate a city council discussion on next steps about that building. And I've been asked to clarify that on the Benton Street project, that is a necessary roadway to provide access to the new office buildings that are going to be built there. So that's what that, just to clarify for Councillor Rumella, that is a downtown project to finish the street grid for those new office buildings.
But we can phase it, right?
I think it can be phased.
Well, so that leads into one of my questions on the Benton Street, because it says, like, you have the cost here at 3.4, and you're saying we have 10 million this next year, but if it was phased, then it would actually be 2.1 million for this budget.
That's correct.
You really threw my thinking off by the fact that that's what that's for, because I don't know that you can avoid doing that, because I mean, if we have some commitment to that being successful in those office space, that pushes it up in my priority list, to be frank. I was looking at this differently. I was trying to figure out how I get back down to, you have a total number here of 16-ish, but that wasn't including phasing that in, so more like probably like 15. That probably about right? I was trying to go backwards to figure out how I could carve off and get the most projects done.
Well, we have 16.2. They just want to know your.
I thought they only had 10, though. You only have
Correct.
10.
We only have 10.
Yeah, so they'll have to cut some of this out. With that being said, the Federal Parkway, I think, is important to me because it's, I think I'm saying it's been here since before I was on council, I think. I'd have to look back. I know it's been on here for a long time. I look at the rodeo market differently, and I think that beat this horse to death and continue to, but the reality of what has to be changed there, and this is one of the missed opportunities in that whole project, was to get ahead of the fact that the city put historical dollars behind that property, and a large amount of the cost to fix that property doesn't really matter what they do with it. If you memorialized it and said, okay, this is a museum, you still would have those costs because a lot of it is the roof. And so I think that being how we're tied into it, we don't have a choice but to take care of it, is my opinion. And we should have done that before we picked somebody to go into that space. And I continue to hold that as my opinion. So that one is high on my list. The fire station one makes sense to me as well. And I know that's more than, but I also, you know, and I know you wanted top three, but quite frankly, if we're going to put our money where our mouth is, we need to partner properly with the Jefferson County Homeless Navigation Center. And I think I like that navigation center because it's the right approach. It's about getting people out of the cycle. It's not about just a handout. It's about a hand up. And that's the proper way to address that situation for those people that we can get out of that cycle. So.
The number one, the Federal Parkway, the Rodeo Market, the Jefferson Homeless Navigator, and fire extinguishers, and or fire exhaust system. I didn't add up my things, but those are my priorities.
Can I just, if my adding was correct, and large caveat, I mean, it looks like we could get a first phase of Benton, even the market in, the fire system replacement, the quiet zone in, Federal Parkway, and the Jefferson County Homelessness Navigator, all for like 10 and change. So I don't know if I added that right, but it looks, you know, because these are all, aside from Federal Parkway, kind of in the 1 to 2 million-ish range. So it feels like there's a lot can be accomplished from what we were all talking about.
And I believe you've heard us, so I trust you with how you prioritize. So you have to deal with the money, and we've just shared some of our things. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Mr. Andrews, the next slide is for me to present to council, but I'd like to ask for a break at this time.
Oh, sure.
I think we skipped our last one, and we're a little past the
Good
one that
time
we
to
had
break.
planned because it's a little bit of a discussion and transition. Thanks. Mayor, thank you. Just a couple of slides to go here, and I'm going to take this one on debt service payments. But before I jump into that, to lend context and ask for the council's direction, I just want to point out for those watching and just as a refresh that the city's strategic plan includes strategic priority 5, which is robust infrastructure. And one of the focused objectives under this strategic priority is, and I'll just read this briefly, is develop recommendations and an associated action plan for addressing deferred maintenance on infrastructure, roads, facilities, and equipment throughout the city. Staff's listening to that, obviously, and planning and working and preparing to do just that, is to create an associated action plan. But there's a key component to that, and that's reflected here on this slide, and that's the concept of addressing some of these needs through borrowing. You'll recall then, and this Monday night, you're taking action to address the will of the voters here in Westminster, and that's to borrow money. There were 4 other actions across the Front Range in other cities that demonstrate the willingness of the voters to extend their taxes or increase their taxes in order to have specific infrastructure and deferred maintenance addressed. There were other actions taken in Littleton, Lone Tree, Denver, Boulder, and of course Westminster to do just that. Part of the reason for the city's borrowing in the past and potential for the future is the concept of intergenerational equity, and that is the folks paying the taxes enjoy the infrastructure and so forth. But also, this introduces a measure of fiscal discipline, and that is, of course, the city has and will always make its debt service payments. But one of the challenges that you all face is in pay-as-you-go financing, that is accumulating money over a long period of time and then spending it down, is you have short-term priorities that just come up, and we've talked about a number of those here today, be it graffiti and code enforcement remediation, parking of vehicles, or managing the situation with homelessness and so forth. So we want to get your feedback. You notice here, this is an opportunity that I see here for Westminster to address your strategic priority, and that is through additional borrowings, in the fact that the city's annual debt service is reducing in the coming year in 2023. The difference between the 2022 bars and the 2023 bars is about $3.5 million in freed up funding. And in as much as we're building your 2023 budget and addressing this strategic priority, we'd like to get your feedback on the potential for potentially surveying Westminster voters on their desires to take on additional debt burden, or for the council to address this through its various mechanisms. But before we would address your strategic plan priority, it would be helpful to staff to understand whether or not that's at least of preliminary interest to you, and whether or not we should survey our residents to understand if issuing debt and borrowing for roadway infrastructure or other capital facilities. It's been discussed, or we've been asked as a staff, are there funds set aside to replace our fire stations? The answer is no. Are there funds set aside to replace our municipal court? The answer is about 25%, perhaps, of the total need to replace a municipal court is set aside, but it'll be several years before enough monies would accumulate to replace the courts. So this is just a very high-level preliminary discussion, and we would invite your direction. Thank you.
I have
Sarah?
Okay, so my question for this graphic is so these are our obligations, our current obligations for payment?
Yes, let me just clarify. Excuse me. Thank you, Ms. Opie. I beg your pardon. These are the annual payments. This is not the total outstanding.
Right. Okay, so yeah. So these are our annual payments. Though I get certificates of participation and leases, but what is the sales and use tax bucket?
Some years ago, sales and use tax revenue bonds were authorized, and you'll see that there was a significant decrease in 2017, and all of those obligations aren't paid off until 2031, but there is a reduction from 2022 to 2023. So those are voter-approved revenue bonds.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I think we have the cart before the horse. I think we need to have projects before we start talking about borrowing money. And
Mayor
not
Pro
just
Tem?
nicey projects, but necessary projects.
Mayor Pro Tem?
For me, I would look at it, but because of the projects that I know do exist, the municipal court probably being the most top of mind. But if you have a list of others, I do agree that, you know, we would want what you do with the money. I mean, and I've brought this up in the past. I think that if you ever see where tax increases are successful, look at the school districts. The school districts in the last handful of years have been very successful because they've been very specific about what the dollars go to. So I would agree to doing it, but I also agree with Councilor Baker, but I know we do have a list, so it would be useful to see the list of things specifically and what kind of dollars are around it. And I know we have figures on some of that, such as the municipal court.
Sarah?
I should not have taken a bite. So with respect to our, to these debt obligations, how do they relate to our water and sewer enterprises and our overall ability to assume debt? Because I know when we were talking about those utilities and are being able to maintain a a net black position of not being, being able to maintain those facilities, we had the expectation that we were going to pull out like $150 million of just not even to build the utility, but or to build a new water treatment plant. But our 10-year projection showed another couple of loans to ensure that we stayed in the black. And then at a certain point, our debt coverage ratio was going to hit a max. So I'm just wanting to understand how these relate or don't to that.
Thank you. Yes, these do not include any reference at all to utility activities. These are completely separate. The utilities perform independently as an enterprise, so these are more all of our other government services presented here, and the subject of I think your strategic priority for robust infrastructure, which describes streets, roads, facilities, and equipment throughout the city. That's the subject here today.
Okay, so my question was actually, if we pull more debt on this side, does it impact our ability to
No.
pull debt on the enterprises?
No, it would not. Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Understanding that's not subject matter, I just want to keep top of mind one of the, because I haven't heard it come up recently when it comes to looking at the other needs of the utility. And if you're going to go out and ask the public anything anyway, it would be an opportunity. In the past, I had asked about the ability to potentially do a small sales tax that would go specifically to the utility. And I know my understanding is other municipalities have done that. So I am still interested in what the public would think about that, because I think if they understand, then everybody who comes into the city who does use the infrastructure, who may not live here, would pay a portion to that via sales tax, and that might be a good mechanism for us to cover long-term costs of the utility when it comes to capital improvements, if it was specifically for that. So I just want to bring it up, since if we're going to go out, it may be an opportunity to ask that question as well.
If we need to look at the big things like the courthouse, possibly redoing or adding firehouses, what utility, I don't care what it is, we need more than 3 weeks before deadline for an issue to go onto a ballot. So my suggestion would be, we start now for next year, because that's what it's going to take. That's what it takes for communication. That's what it takes for the public to understand what we need and not rush things. So that's where I sit.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think that was our intention in bringing this forward, in as much as we're having a capital conversation and in as much as the calendar is reflecting this upcoming decrease. Yes, that's our thought as well. And I think what I'm hearing and taking away is we want to return to the council in the future and present a sort of a holistic needs list to include things like municipal court and those other big ticket type items. We'll do that very intentionally, and then get further feedback and develop an action plan going forward to include some of the potential outreach that Mayor Pro Tem described. So thank you for this discussion today, and I think we've got good direction.
And I think by then, hopefully within the next month or two, we're going to know where we sit with utilities and our water treatment plants. So that's a perfect time to start planning for next year, because we'll have a better picture. Thanks.
And just out of curiosity, the basically debt service payments that are the pink ones, that was on a voter authorized bond? Voter authorized debt?
It's a mix between the two. If you look at 22 versus 23, the orange bar that goes down, that was voter approved, and there is a decrease in the gray bar, and that is not voter approved. So it's a hybrid
Right.
there.
Those are all certificates of participation, which are, in a sense, one-year leases. Okay, the yellow ones are on the fire trucks, the yellow bars?
A mix of fire trucks, as you put it, and then also we have some leases related to the city's golf enterprise activities.
Okay, and all the golf enterprise, even though it's an enterprise, is somehow wrapped into this?
We've presented it here just as a reference point and just for the sake of disclosure. It's not within the utility, but which would be substantially larger, but would be visible here. And you don't see substantial changes happening there, but yes, they are presented here.
Well, if we didn't put the water utility, why did we put the golf enterprise? If we didn't put the water enterprise here, why do we put the golf enterprise here?
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, I think we just did it out of the idea of transparency, and I apologize if that created any confusion, but it's not a materially large number.
Thank you. Oh, and why don't we put the court here? We're going to own the whole building. We could build a couple courthouses, sally ports, security handling, a couple offices for the judge. Activate this building. Anyway, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I think we've got some direction on capital, and we incidentally, Presiding Municipal Judge Lontine, as a part of his report to you on the courts, is organizing with our facilities team a report for you, and it has an invitation that he would like to make to invite you to the courts to better understand that facility and its purpose-built need, much like airline terminals, train stations, hospitals. It's a very specific use. As Councilor Baker pointed out, a sally port is a way to transport in custody defendants, et cetera. I won't elaborate on it, but that's to come in the future. So thank you for this direction today.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? In the previous budget plan or proposed plan, you have listed out capital improvement program and all of the items that you're looking at focusing on, or that's on the docket. Can that be a part of this budget when we get the full scope as far as the capital improvement program? But what I would like is to understand what's checked off our list, right? Because, so for example, it says England Park Corridor. That was on the post discussion this past Monday. So can we check that off the list? Like, I would just like to have an understanding as far as what we're checking off between now and then. Because I also believe that I saw the Benton Street Phase 1 and Phase 2 on here as well. So if we could just have a good snapshot of what was proposed then, what we checked off now, and then what's proposed for 2023 and on, that would be helpful.
I second
Absolutely.
that.
I think we heard that, and we'll continue to evolve the way we're presenting capital spending and accomplishments in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As we talk through a number of these items, these really big ticket dollar items, we wanted to raise this, recap the American Rescue Plan Act funds that the city has received. As part of the budget process, we will be returning to you to allocate these funds in the correct accounts to move forward with these expenses. We discussed these within the last few months, but we're keeping these in mind as we work through the budget process and having these funds to address some of these big ticket items that we've been working through today.
I had just one question on this list. At one point, I can't remember what it was, I think something with the city hall's money for what they were going to do there. Hadn't we suggested taking some money and doing a lottery or doing something to put a Zeroscape model in each of, like, the police department beats? What happened to that thought? Does anybody else remember that discussion that we had?
We're looking at
Instead
each
of-
other. We may need to just provide some follow-up, Mayor.
Okay, I just
on
wondered,
this,
because
but Mayor Pro
it's
Tem-
late now, so I'm figuring we're not doing it this summer, but.
I remember the
never-
discussion, but I don't remember. It was an idea we threw out to be able to showcase it in each area so people understood it, but
Instead of just having everything at City Hall.
I don't know if it went any further than
Yeah.
that discussion.
Never heard about it again. Just wondered.
We'll follow up on that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So next, you probably need to know if we'd like option A, B, or Z and X.
Yes, ma'am.
After hearing everything, and I know Jody has shared his thoughts that option A is a good one for where we're at right now. What is your thoughts?
Well, I'm of course disappointed. And that's why I had earlier asked for, shouldn't council give the staff direction? Because my greatest fear was, in forming the new budget, staff would take what we did in the old budget, add a little bit to it, and bring it back to us. And pretty much that's what I see here. And I'd like to break away from that model. I find that model so constricting, so confining. We just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I think we as a city council have some chance to reinvent the way we deliver services. What services we deliver, how we serve the public. And it's not here, so I guess I'll continue to work on that, but there's so many different things we can do and not be confined to this same old that we've been doing. So I'm disappointed in the budget, and so.
Sir?
And this is just for the staffing thing. Yeah, I definitely think it's worthwhile to look through, to go with option A and then have the new city manager evaluate what we can't keep. And I strongly encourage that we just have those measures and have some real clarity over if we are getting rid of something or removing FTE, that we know exactly what that means.
Lindsay?
For me, I think it would be extremely helpful to understand what our actual has been over the years, because an authorized budget amount that we're not filling, it's helpful to understand what's actual and what's budgeted. And so I think that would help me see the trends in over the years as far as how many positions we're actually filling. So I think that's kind of a missing piece for me. Going through this entire presentation and talking through what's needed and what staff is looking for on accomplishing throughout our strategic plan, it makes sense to go with option A. But in order to really solidify that option, I think it would be helpful in the full breakdown of our budget to understand that staffing across time on what we've actually had for staff, because then that can really lend a snapshot to our actual service levels and the quality of service that we're providing. So that's a missing piece for me, but otherwise I'm for moving forward with option A.
Pro Tem?
Much to what I said earlier, I want option A, not because I don't want to look and see if there's ability to cut headcount if it makes sense, but I want it to make sense. I don't want it to just provide an arbitrary number. I think one thing that we as a council need to be realistic about is the cities went through a lot of change in a short period of time, and it's a big ship to turn. So we need the ability to get a leader in place who can listen to us and hear our concerns and realize that we do want to see savings if it makes sense to provide the best level of service. So option A is where I am, with the caveat of I do want to do all that analysis and figure out like what is the right number. I think that Councilor Emmons makes a really good point. It would be great to see a trend line that is actual FTEs that are employed versus what was budgeted to whatever possibility, which I'm sure that's difficult since to acting manager Andrew's point earlier that day to day that changes. But I don't know if you could kind of take a snapshot in time or something, but it would be interesting to see what that actual trend is from year to year.
I'm for option A, just because I think it gives more flexibility with where we're at and where we might want to go. But most of all, I want to say thank you. I know we must have people out there listening because I see your texts. You're going back and forth, so somebody's communicating with you when we've had questions. So to all of you out there that are participating today, and to those of you sitting with us, thanks for all of this work and bringing it to us. The graphs were easy. These that we got in our stuff that was sent out to us to get ready for today were easy to read, understood where you were headed, understand where everybody else has had suggestions. So I don't know if you need anything else from us, but I think we've given direction. And I know how much time this takes. So thank you, and thank you to all of our department heads that are listening and getting us answers.
If I could also add a thank you to the staff here at the MAC who helped set us up,
Yep.
And the officers that are here as
Yep.
well. We appreciate that. It takes a small army
Yes.
to make this happen. So thank you to everyone.
And I'm grateful. We're getting everybody out of here early. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. And for those of you listening, we'll be at the park tonight at 128th Big Dry Creek and have popcorn available for you, 7 o'clock. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor.